maybe just be helpful for those that are on the line if we just do some brief self-introductions for everyone in the room. So we're going to start with.
So I'm Matthew Fina, California Lutheran University, and working with the Stantec team.
Aaron Fukuda, mid-kaweah GSA and Tulare ID.
James Fisher, mid-kaweah GSA and Tulare ID.
Joe Cardoza, Greater Kaweah GSA, Consolidated People's Ditch.
James Silva, Greater Kaweah GSA, Consolidated People's Ditch Company, and several other small ditch companies.
Scott Rogers, TID.
David Cardoza, former Greater and Mid-kaweah.
Craig Wallace, Lindsay Strathmore Irrigation District, East Kaweah, and the Chumna Water Company.
Matt Watkins, farmer East Kaweah.
Subby Mulholland, Advisory Council to GSAs.
Chuck Nickel, committee member and farmer.
And this is Craig Moyle with the Stantec team. And then on the line we have, you want to go and start from the top, Alexis. Laura. Good too.
Are these on? She's speaking.
Alexis Rosa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Maybe you ought to just go through and just introduce.
We have Alexis
Yeah.
Flores, Alexis Rosa, Andrew Park, Eric Hoffeling from Greater Kaweah, Jasmine, I'm not sure what Jasmine's with, Johnny Gailey, Andrea Clarkson with Stantec, she's been maintaining this for us, Luis Sanchez, Rachel Young, Sean Corley, and Sonia Sanchez. All right, and over to Matthew.
All right. So we sent out an agenda ahead of time. You can see here the two new items, 3 items for this week. We'll give you an update on the legal and engineering team's work, what they're working on, and the schedule for doing that. We'll revisit what we were calling last time as the straw proposal or the pilot. We made a lot of decisions in the last meeting, so we'll review what was decided last week, what we're now calling the water marketing strategy version 1.0, and then address some next steps and decision points related to that strategy, and then also talk briefly about an October public workshop that's scheduled, I believe, for the 19th. So that's for the plan today. So we did our roll call. You want to just briefly talk about?
Yeah, committee members, I apologize. This was my fault. Got carried away with other things that are going on. The self-help member has moved on from self-help, and they've appointed a new member, Luis Sanchez, who's online with us. And I apologize, I needed to get you his application for your review and consideration. I'll do that after this meeting, and then what we'll do is we'll consider his enrollment at the next committee meeting. But I looked it over his application. He's well qualified, and we hope to welcome him into the group and to represent the disadvantaged communities and self-help enterprises. So he's online with us. So Luis, I appreciate you tracking with us there, and we'll get you enrolled here by the next committee meeting. So.
And Luis, are you able to unmute yourself and just say hello so we know that you're able to contribute today?
Hi, everybody.
Great. All right. Thanks for joining us. All right. So just a quick previous meeting recap. So we came to you with a straw proposal last time and actually started considering alternatives for the rules and structures of a pilot market to be implemented this coming water year. And so here is what we talked about and decided on last week. So what we're now calling version 1.0. This is sort of a test market that we would implement during the current water year. So obviously this thing isn't up and running October 1st, but it would run through the end of the water year, September 30th, 2023. The unit traded would be 1 acre-foot of allocation measured as evapotranspiration. And the water eligible for trade is a participant's allocation of native yields. We talked about that's the one bucket that everyone has. And so individuals would be allowed to sell their native yield for this year, up to their native yield if it hadn't been pumped. And so that's a temporary transfer of up to 100% of unused native yield. And then eligible participants are agricultural, so wells designated as agricultural wells. So land that has, land parcels that are designated agricultural in a GSA that hold allocation and who are current with all GSA rules and regulations, are current with all fees and in compliance with all GSA ordinances. Some of the alternative strategies we talked about was the type of exchange, the availability of price information, and strategies for mitigating adverse impacts. And so we chose a formal exchange platform run by a third-party exchange administrator that would conduct a monthly auction. So we talked about the frequency of these auctions should not be greater than the frequency of reporting in Land IQ. So a monthly auction, and we discussed conducting those in the first 3 months once the market is up and running, and then in the last 3 months of the water year. Price information, the group just chose anonymized price information, but an abundance of price information. So transaction-specific price and quantity information, but presented in an anonymized way that would not reveal the identities of parties or parcels, individual parcels. And then for mitigation of adverse impacts, we discussed the use of the GSP designated management zones. And I'll show you a map again, in case you weren't with us last time. And so there are already GSA designated management areas, and we discussed aggregating those into groups that would become trading zones, a small number of trading zones. And then there would be triggers that would alter the inclusion of those management areas in the trading zones. And again, I'll show you just to refresh your memory what that looks like, but there would be a minimum threshold trigger. So an individual management zone would drop out of the trading zone if a minimum threshold was crossed. And we discussed both groundwater level and subsidence minimum thresholds. And so that group would fall out of the group and would have to manage its cap within the smaller management area if the minimum threshold trigger is crossed. We also discussed a disadvantaged community trigger. So if a small municipal well, the water level declines to within a certain number of feet of the bowl, that trading in that particular management zone would cease until that impact to the small municipal well had been mitigated. So here's a photo of what that might look like. So for example, you see here yellow, or the light green and orange would be greater Kaweah management areas. The light blue and the gray would be mid-kaweah management zones. And then the gray ones on the right-hand side are East Kaweah, obviously. And so getting direction from the engineering team, we would aggregate these management areas into trading zones. One possibility would actually be that initially it would be all of the management areas within the GSA initially, or maybe they would be broken into maybe 2 trading zones. We'll let the engineering team weigh in. So there'd be some logic for grouping those management zones. And then a particular management zone within that group, like say 30 here on the left-hand side of the screen, if it were to cross its minimum threshold, it would be pulled out of the group. It could no longer transfer pumping with distant parcels. And in particular, it couldn't buy pumping from up the groundwater gradient, uphill that groundwater gradient, and would have to simply limit trades to within that management area. So that's the minimum threshold trigger for these management zones. So here this was the hypothetical we presented last month, where the orange here would be a trading zone. All of the management areas in the orange would be a single trading zone. But if one of those management areas, like for example 30, crossed its minimum threshold, it would be pulled out of that larger trading zone. So any questions about that?
But in that zone itself could trade that native.
Yes, correct. So it's sort of like you're managing the cap locally. The fear is to prevent increases in net pumping in 30 by buying pumping from outside, right? Now, in the case of the disadvantage, if it was a disadvantaged community trigger in 30, then trading would cease until that impact was mitigated.
Matthew, are you gonna wait and ask for comment on all of these or
Well, so
or as we go?
no, so those are the decisions that were made. So let's go back. Are there questions or comments about any aspect of that?
I had one on this, the DAC trigger.
Yeah.
Bowls are readily moved.
Right.
So say either that's the wrong
Could be.
choice of
Could be.
a measurement, or there needs to be a process where it can be remediated, where
Yes.
bowls could be moved.
So that's exactly the vision. Is that for a disadvantaged community trigger, as soon as the problem's mitigated, trading can resume inside that management area. And in fact, the management area could even rejoin the trading zone. So the idea is if the simplest mitigation is to drop the bowl, then as soon as the bowl drops, you could, and I agree. I notice I put XX feet of, I should have put XX feet of something. It doesn't have to be the bowl, the engineering.
Submerged, whatever, but
Yeah.
but could you have a situation where somebody says, no, I don't want to move the bowls, they're still working? And then so you have an entire zone is stymied because trading is disallowed when there's a readily available fix. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen.
But it could. No, but it realistically could.
But I have a question about that is that because I think one of the things we talked about a month ago was that if the implication is that it's growers pumping is what's dropping water levels, the growers could mitigate it by paying to have the bowl dropped, right? So
Yeah.
is that incentive enough that the disadvantaged community would take them up on that offer?
You would think so, but people act strangely at times.
Well, and then
Particularly if they have a perceived economic advantage, they may want, no, we want a brand new one.
Yeah,
yeah,
fair enough, fair enough. Yeah.
Or they dropped the bowls and now it's pumping sand, so now I need a new set of bowls.
or even
Or I need
worse,
to
the water
develop it.
quality goes, you go from nitrates to arsenic or something like that. So, yeah, that's gonna be an interesting, and that's where I would envision that the GSA has to step in as an intermediary to try and make that happen. Right.
It's at least something to the effect that, okay, this is fine, this is a trigger and it stops it. But there's some process of
To mitigate.
remediation as
Right.
long as it's at no cost
To
to
the,
the disadvantaged
Yeah.
community and the water quality is not impacted.
that's why I think the best mechanism is for the GSA to be doing that rather than an individual group of growers that would have a harder time negotiating that.
It's just one of those things, such, if there's available that it's not, consent to it's not unreasonably.
It needs to be appropriately mitigated, not
Mhm.
extremely mitigated. But no, that's a good point.
You have to forgive me, I didn't make the last meeting and I was out of state. So I wanted to inquire, first thing, all this information now, where can I download everything on the new proposal? Because I'm kind of coming into this
It should be on the website, yeah,
Yeah,
with the,
it is
with the
correct.
video.
with the video. Okay, second thing, we still have to get buy-in from GSAs, and GSAs may want to alter these rules and so on, because they may say, we don't want to reach minimum thresholds on certain things. We may say we want to mitigate this, and stop it even before it gets to some
Yeah.
point.
And actually, so that's another one where it's a little sloppy in the writing here. And these, because of a computer problem, these slides were hastily remade in the middle of the night. So what we actually discussed, if you look at the video from the last one, was not that when the MT is crossed, it's within a certain percentage of the minimum threshold. It's not necessarily all the way to the minimum threshold. And again, the engineering team will be providing guidance on what the
But
the
what may
recommended
work
policy
in
is.
one area may not necessarily be, how would you say, as appropriate in another area, depending on the, how would you say, the depth of well or depth of water and so on, or how much available water is there. In other words, if you're along the eastern side and so on, those conditions are much different than they are here on the western end.
So the idea is to this version 1.0 will be available to the 3 GSAs, and each GSA could then do what they would like with that document. Adopt it, modify it, implement it, not implement it.
So then the constraints and so on, or whether it be transferring in or transferring out, it would be the constraint, they have to meet the constraints of, if they were going from GSA to GSA.
Correct. But
They
that
would have to meet the constraints from both GSAs in order to make the trade
across a line. Yep.
across the line. Okay. The other thing is you have some sort of proposal on who's going to be the arbiter of this broker or whatever, or what?
Not yet. It was just merely agreed upon that they did not want the GSAs to be the point on the one running the formal exchange. That was the committee decision.
GSAs will have to approve the transfers, but
Correct.
Right.
The GSAs approved the
they don't
transfer.
want to administrate.
Yeah, it's best to have a third-party administrator outside of the GSAs was the decision.
Other comments or questions?
That's a good one though, because it brings up that
Mitigation plan.
a mitigation plan has to be implemented within the, and I think that unless the committee feels differently, that the GSA almost has to be the negotiator on the mitigation plan. It'd be awkward to have a group of growers go to a DAC and try and negotiate a deal. It just seems odd.
My only caveat on that specific item would be, what if it takes 4 months and you're out of the growing season and someone needs transfers to make it through the year? I'd rather have, if the GSA is tackling the specific issue that comes up, it may take some time to tackle it, but I don't know that you want to
Well,
sell trades while you're doing that.
I know that probably plays into our well mitigation programs, which I know the mid-kaweah is talking about preemptively, not waiting for the well to go dry, but we're going to use the model to anticipate where we're going to have the issue and preemptively don't create the scenario where you have a dry well, put it that way.
And I think this creates, positive incentives to be forward-looking, to not wait until it's a big problem, right?
Sometimes people aren't forward-looking until they've had to look backwards.
They're looking down from the bottom of the.
I just think you need some sort of a remediation process. So people can be unreasonable on both sides, right? And people can be reasonable on both sides.
Yep.
When they're reasonable on both sides, it works.
Yeah, so I think this committee should make, so part of the strategy that we're going to develop, this committee should make a pretty specific recommendation on what a reasonable mitigation plan looks like.
But I agree that the GSA should be the arbiter, whatever you want to call it, of that process.
I think you're gonna have huge kickback from the DCs if you say, oh, well, this is in the middle of our growing season. You don't have any water, but too bad. That's not gonna fly.
Yeah, but you can't prove to me that ceasing the pumping is going to solve it either.
I'm just telling you that listening to the power that the DACs have right now, they're out of water. They're
It's
not,
gonna
it's
get-
not,
it's
the
gonna get-
arbitrator's not gonna be able to say, well, we'll worry about it.
No, I didn't say we delay on when we worry about it. I'm saying, I don't know that you, if it's being acted on, I don't know that you cease everything until it may be fixed through next down the road. That's the concern.
Comment here from Eric Osterling. Is the model discrete enough to run that precise enough of a forecast? I don't think it is. It's a regional model at this point.
The mid-kaweah is preparing our model to be able to get at those questions. We're asking our team to be ready to do that for us.
Anything you want to add to that, Eric?
I mean, I could just take our current groundwater levels and tell you where it's going to happen. It's right. I mean, regionally, we know where it's going to happen. We're dropping at 10 to 15 feet. Okay, well, dry, we know that well's at jeopardy right there.
Okay, sorry, yeah, Craig had to unmute me. I would have spoken up. I agree, Aaron. I think in certain areas of the basin that the data is available to have that discrete look, but I think there are other parts of the basin where that's not the case.
Okay, Sony should be unmuted now.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I just made the comment that I think that there are certain areas of the basin that maybe there is the available discrete data, but there's maybe other areas where it's not. And I do know just the construct of the model that it's not designed for that, for a very specific look at a specific area in order to understand the impacts to the level that I think that need to be considered with these kind of moves of water. I don't have the confidence in the model right now, the way it's at.
I don't know that we have confidence in the fact that we don't really know what the well and pumping levels are, in a lot of areas as well. They can vary dramatically.
Sonia, you want to try your microphone now?
Let me just add, I think the model can get there. I just don't think it's there right now. That's my only point. I didn't mean to be a skunk in the room.
So I'm confused. I just need some help. Because we're saying that the amount of water to be traded is based on native yield, which is determined every year. Then are we, when we're talking about the well pumping limitations, we're only talking about the DACs? Or are we somehow, I'm confused as to how.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So then what it is we're only at this point, version 1.0 is meant to address, the committee felt that right now, because we know we all have the native yield, then that's an easy trade. Like, I know you have a native yield. I have a native yield. We can work something out. This is a protection layered on top of that, not inclusive of so it's meant to protect the disadvantaged community when the movement of that native yield. So you can't begin trading, and so trading theoretically accelerates a pumping.
It can't accelerate.
Yeah, well, that's true.
A local decline.
So you don't, so it's a protection against that increase in pumping near. So if we get close to a threshold level, you're going to say, no, we got to stop. We got to
stop trading, not stop pumping.
Correct.
Stop trading.
Yeah, so you can't potentially increase it above what you're.
So that a well near, or a parcel near the disadvantaged community would still be allowed to pump its allocation. It couldn't import extra allocation onto the parcel to increase its pumping.
Okay, Sonia? Thank
you. Yes, I was able to unmute, and I just want to echo Sophie's comment earlier and add to this conversation that through self-help enterprises work providing drought relief assistance to private well owners, we are seeing places where there is a direct correlation of ag wells that are either across the street or very close by communities where they have private wells, where the ag wells are pumping water, causing the private wells to go dry. So I just wanted to flag that there is that direct correlation that we are seeing in certain communities. While we're not seeing that specifically right now in the Kaweah Subbasin, that is something that can happen if there is overpumping by a grower that is across the street or very close by a residence that has a private well. So I do want us to consider that scenario because that is, and I can share specifics of communities where we are seeing that, but nonetheless, that is something that we are seeing, and a mitigation program and or planning for these areas as buffer zones for these water markets can help prevent these private wells from being impacted. And if they are impacted, having a mitigation framework in place can help these households get water quickly. As you know, in many of these communities, especially during the summer, they have swamp coolers, and so they require water to keep their homes cool. And then just the everyday, life using water, from brushing your teeth to taking a shower to cooking. These are all very real impacts that our communities are facing.
Thank you, Sonia. And obviously, since you use the word buffer zone, and so effectively, for example, I'm not picking on 30, but if it's out here on the left, it's easy to see. If the management zone number 30 were to have a shallow municipal well go hit the trigger, then effectively that management zone would become what you call that we refer to as the buffer zone. That would be the buffer zone around it. And again, for the benefit of everybody, we wouldn't be restricting individual parcels' ability to pump their allocation just to increase their allocation through trade. So we're trying to mitigate the potential adverse impacts of transfers.
Question. Now, you're saying within a management zone, so the whole management zone gets shut down, correct, for transfer?
Yep.
What about transfers within that same management zone?
Well, under the,
Using the bait.
yeah,
For
for the-
native yield.
yeah, for the protection of, there's two protection levels, right? So there was a transfer between zones, and then there's the disadvantaged community. So in the case of the transfer between zones, you couldn't transfer, you can still transfer within, but if you didn't have a disadvantaged community, 30U doesn't have a disadvantaged community in it. You could still transfer within that.
But if it had a disadvantaged community within that 30U, and you're saying that because you're saying you're going to shut down that whole management zone, but when in fact that management zone maybe
Maybe
the
smaller,
water,
yeah.
well, or the water, actually the effects, and maybe that they're okay, we're going to shut down pumping right next across the street from them, but we're going to pump 4 miles away.
Yeah.
And we want to be able to transfer that water. Would they not be able to do that? When in fact it could be
It's a
to the
Yeah.
positive.
So this, and we should be obviously admit what everyone knows. This is not perfect.
Yeah.
We're trying to start simple,
Mhm.
implement something that can be
I understand.
implemented in a short period of time. So for example, a much more complex way to do it would be to say, okay, no, there's a buffer zone of 1/2 mile around the disadvantaged community. That just becomes very unwieldy and difficult to implement. It would require all kinds of, mapping of well locations and that sort of thing, and that's just not feasible. So the trade-off here is between what is simple and feasible in a short period of time and what's perfect. We can work on perfect, but we won't have a water market in the next 5 years.
What I think Joe is alluding to is that maybe you don't restrict, the rule could be simplified to not restricting, you actually want to incentivize the trading out.
Yeah.
So this was something we did discuss briefly last week, but it's actually something, a decision point
Today.
lower in the presentation to revisit is, should these triggers result simply in carving that out and separating it from the trading zone, or should it instead impose a directional restriction, which means these people can sell their pumping up gradient, they can't buy, which is what you're saying. And so that is one more layer of complexity, because now the auction rules have to build that directional restriction into it. So there's some, but that's exactly what we do in Fox Canyon. It is a directional restriction. And we have successfully transferred pumping out of a management zone as a result. So that is very doable.
It provides that zone with a little bit of flexibility and
Not the flexibility to buy,
but a
pumping
flexibility to sell, so they're not just left there stuck then
Yeah.
with a problem.
Yeah, the other one too is that, it was a thoughtful, when we were developing the straw proposal, it was a thoughtful decision, not an accident, that the DAC trigger is a stricter, it's a bigger restriction. The idea was to create incentives to mitigate the problem, so that boom, you can immediately return to transfers, right? Whereas if you're getting close to a minimum threshold, it's not clear that can be as easily mitigated, right? Whereas you might be able to mitigate an individual disadvantaged community quickly.
I think there are DACs and the wells that serve DACs. Is that defined under SIGMA, or is that
So
designated by a GSA?
there's disadvantaged communities that have boundaries as defined. I would consider a well within that boundary a disadvantaged community well. And then there are public wells, which are state designated public wells. And so for disadvantaged communities, there's usually a combination of both. So you're going to be within, let's just use Okieville, for example. It's a block of land with a boundary around it. Not identified by the county, I believe. I think it's more state level mapping. Sonia, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong on that, or Luis. I don't think there's like a city limit. There's no city limit. There's no incorporated. However, Okieville now has a community services district, so they might have put some boundaries around it. But I would consider that public well, which they have, a disadvantaged community public
There's a
well.
whole host of individual private wells.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And just currently the movement right now is for those communities like that, is to go to a public well type system and then hook up. So there'd be like 2 or 3 main wells and then you distribute the water. Other communities are beginning to consolidate, which is to consolidate into some larger city like the city of Tulare. So the process is underway. The other issue you have is, what if you have a small residential home just randomly out there on its own? The GSA is currently considering a well mitigation program that would lower that well to avoid the situation in the future, right? So you mitigate it ahead of its problem is the goal right now.
So basically, any household in the DAC could be a trigger.
Yes. Now, what a mitigation program in that situation like Okieville, if there's a public well system, for instance, I had a couple of homeowners in Okieville call me, and the mitigation program was just, they actually had the hookup and they just didn't want to do it. And when their well went dry, then they were just waiting, right? When the well went dry, then they would do the hookup. They just didn't want to do it at the time. And so we put them in contact with Self-Help, does a fantastic job of connecting it, and then you just hook up the system and now you're on the public system. Now, the public system then becomes the big issue. Now you got to make sure that public well must be protected under that.
But they're typically deeper and so on. What about like the Thede track and the Villa and those areas?
A lot of those are now on the city of Tulare.
Okay, but they still have private wells out there too.
You're right. It's somewhat like, so they,
Like
again,
Okieville.
yeah, and I think what's happening out there when they dry, they make the connection. I think the connection, Sonia, am I wrong? In most of these consolidations, there is a connection for each household. They're just not tied in to the household, right?
It depends on the community. Some that are in what they call the sphere of influence are already set up for that connection, but others are not. It just depends on the community.
So there'd be a line in the road and they just need to tee off and to the home.
Yeah, I think the big ones are easy to identify, and they're obviously going to be highly prioritized because they impact a lot of people. What I have a concern about is you have all these random people that are living in rental homes or whatever out in the countryside. Because there are a lot of residences out there. And if there's a program to mitigate there somehow, some attorney firm somewhere is going to figure this out. And there's going to be flyers on every household saying, I can get you this.
Well, and that's why I think.
And so that's,
yeah,
and it's not the 4-month thing. And we want everybody to have water. But if somebody's trying to interpose and take advantage of that, that's where I think it's.
And I think that's where that's a separate issue. That I think what you're speaking to is the domestic well mitigation programs we're all working on, which is a commitment that the GSA.
But it would interrupt this training program.
No, actually, it avoids the need for the protection in the trading. Because what
All
we're
right, so that's not even going to be addressed. Because I heard Sonia talking about private, and I saw public wells in here. I just got.
Well, and so
yeah, we're basically gonna, so to simplify the ag mitigation program that the mid-kaweah is starting to discuss is basically looking at the domestic wells that are out there, and the ones that are sitting above the minimum threshold is preemptively going in and getting them down below the minimum threshold.
Oh, I see.
And the other one too is where we need to put a placeholder here and make sure we revisit this, is that the engineering team, one of their deliverables is a chapter that in the scope of work was called potential buyers and sellers. It also includes all of these issues. So what are the triggers? How close to the minimum threshold can we get? What does it mean? Is it the bowl? Is it X feet of something else? And then identifying, okay, where are the disadvantaged communities that could trigger one of these things? And so all of that, this group, we need to make sure that all of that is in the water marketing strategy and spelled out explicitly.
I didn't mean to belabor the.
No, but
That's a great point.
it's the most important point,
Yeah.
right? In all reality is what we're worried about, because you can't, and again, the odd part is this group's goal is to talk about the trading component of it, but it bleeds over into the,
But the
Other
other thing is
actions.
this group's job is,
Can't trade.
yeah,
there's no need, yeah.
but this group's job is to anticipate, every time we make a decision about a rule or a structure, there's trade-offs. So this committee's job is to anticipate what are the unintended consequences and how do we mitigate those? And both unintended consequences to disadvantaged communities, but also unintended consequences to growers and potential market participants.
I was just gonna say, if you wanted me to, perfect script of everything, we would be out, we would identify the wells that are sitting up high and get them down into the minimum threshold plus a little buffer, because you can't set the bowls on the minimum threshold. There's a level, is that 25 feet or whatever it is. And then the GSA will pay for that wherever you're at 2015 down to that point. So you're not paying for the whole well, but you're paying for the deepening of the well. And that portion under which the GSA is saying we might have to take our levels down to there, and we're going to protect you against that level. Now so from top to 2015 would be the landowner's perspective, cost. And so we're only paying for that between 2015 and down to the bottom, and helping with technical support, making sure the well is, because I'll be very honest, you talk to a lot of well owners, they don't even understand how the well works, the right equipment,
But then this becomes, what's nice then is that mitigation plan nullifies the DAC trigger. It reverts it to the minimum threshold.
Yep. You got it covered.
Well, I just was taking off what you said and going back to what I was talking to you about the year before of what's happening in Porterville. So this is not a disadvantaged community, but you have land that has never had a well on it, and they've never pumped and they've never farmed it. And this guy came in and is going to put in 40 acres of oranges and just put in this huge well, and is also planning on how he got that. I just heard about this from the two landowners that are surrounding it. They're worried to death they're going to end up with no water. And how did this happen? So they're scared. So, and it's something like this. I'm just bringing it back. They're not that, but obviously somebody's gone in there and taken all the water away from them. So can he now, this person, sell his water to somebody else? Or can he, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't know the Thule rules good enough to know.
I'm calling, as I said, I don't know either.
Yeah, I know in our subbasin, if it was never farmed,
What was that?
I don't know. In our subbasin, if it's not irrigated agriculture, if you haven't been using it and it doesn't have the return flows coming off of it, we're not going to allocate you a full block. We discriminate between.
You still have your native yield, though.
You still have the native yield, but that's 10
That's
inches and that's it. You're not going to create this big pumping regime, and that's what I hope the Thule.
It should be the same way.
Yeah,
correct?
so that's why-
It shouldn't have transitional pumping or anything like that. It should just be.
That's what I was telling Sophie is I think that whoever did that is one of those people that just has their head in the sand, and when they get down to it, and then they get hit with the penalties and everything, they're going to go, oh shoot, and their investment now looks, the bank's going to flop them and they're going to be upside down.
Easy to irrigate.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Then when he gets to,
And then you flip it, right? And it's the next sucker's problem.
that's, yeah.
That's very interesting.
Well, I've seen it in white ground in the pistachios for the last 20 years.
Wow.
Out on the west side, you mean?
Well, even closer, right?
Or closer, yeah.
So any other comments or questions about this? We'll revisit. So what was discussed last month and decision made about sort of big 30,000 foot elements of this, broad structures, broad rules. Obviously, the devil's in the details, so we'll start to dive into some of that minutia in a bit. All right, so quick legal and engineering team. So we'll be revisiting that discussion we just had. Now the legal and engineering team update.
We're now set up on monthly meetings with the legal and the engineering team, and the legal has an outline that of the chapters that they're going to start to have to put together. And we have I think our meeting is tomorrow. Right? Yeah, we have a meeting with them tomorrow. So I don't have much of an update because it's been 30 days since the last time we met, which was here's the outline. They need to get started on it. They're all very busy people, but we've told them we're targeting an implementation this year. So chapter's got to be drafted one way or another. And then on the engineering team, I think they largely have been watching us talk about this. And I think even like the concept of the minimum threshold being, that was Derek advising us that that's probably where you're going to need to do, you're going to need to use that as your limits. And so that's where we started. And so as you can see here,
the engineering team was very excited about progress that was made in the last.
And I think they're largely just waiting for us to develop all the various elements so that they can kind of put their engineering guidance on. I think the management zone is one of the things they're going to have to look at for us, and the triggers and that sort of thing. So I think they're ready to go. They're just be tracking with us as we start making the decisions.
And in a sense, the engineering team's job was a little simpler. There's two basic questions they're working on. First, what's the logical initial grouping of those management areas? Is it just GSA wide, or is there some reason to break a GSA into 2 or more trading zones, 2 or more groups of management areas? So they'll be providing some logic for that initial. Obviously, this is just version 1.0. It can change in year 2, but they'll give us that initial recommendation. And then these other things we've been talking about. So what are those triggers? How do we know when a trigger has been reached? In the case of a disadvantaged community, what is a disadvantaged community? What is actually the measurable outcome that we're targeting as the trigger? And so their chapter will be providing guidance about those details. So that's the engineering team. The legal team has a sort of broader task. One is a chapter that provides legal guidance regarding the details of this version 1.0 market that we're crafting. What does the law say about this? What are the legal implications of the plan that this committee is designing? And then second, so that's a big chapter all in itself. What does the law have to say about this? And then second, what are all the ordinances, agreements, and other administrative actions that a GSA would actually have to take to implement this thing, to allow these transfers to begin taking place in this next water year? And so that's 2 different chapters they're working on.
They're evaluating one of the questions they have is that it's an interesting one is, so how does the participant sign into an agreement to participate in the market?
Yep.
Is it a document that they sign into? Is it each trade? Is it, it's going to be complicated if you have to go to each trade and sign an agreement. But there's a participation agreement or something that gets you in the door?
How about a brand or a tattoo?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and the other thing is, what about the measurement of the water? Is this going through Land IQ?
Yep.
Or meters, or
Right.
you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
How is all that?
I think we're going to, and that's why James is here to give you a kind of for those of you that haven't seen the water dashboard, is to see how that's.
And this is one of the most fundamental questions to market participants. How do I understand the status of my own water use? And how do I know that the person who's offering to transfer water actually have water available to transfer to me? And so the water accounting dashboard will be the basis for those 2 pieces of information.
So right now, the water dashboard is by default based on ET.
Yeah. So in the early years, that's what it will be.
Yeah, and we are all keenly aware that there might be, we were always prepared for the water dashboard potentially has to go in case the GSAs are prepared to go meter, flop and go, okay, we're going to go meter. So we might have to be ready for that shift or a combination thereof.
All right, that's a great segue. So as we start to dive into some of the minutia of the water marketing strategy and the next decision points, we wanted to look at, should just give you a quick walkthrough of the water accounting dashboard. And again, why this becomes really important to the market is that a market participant needs to be able to understand the status of their water use and understand what they have available to trade or what they need, what they think.
Here to try to help with the phones, or no, does it matter?
Can you?
So James is going to share the screen.
I'll just provide a couple, very brief, just 2 or 3 minute update, and then I'll let Matt kind of contextualize all the information in here, because there's a lot of features I'm just going to scratch the surface on here, but this is what the water dashboard looks like currently. Right now, the allocation is based on parcel acres, so you'll see the default water supply, at least in the mid-kaweah's example, it's 2.5 acre-feet per acre. So in the this example,
If I may interrupt, can we dim those?
Oh,
lights?
yeah, that's true.
And then
It's
James,
impossible
can
to read
can
that.
you, if you move your cursor to highlight things, can we see your cursor? Yes, we can.
yeah, okay. So when we look at, let's see here, it'll show the parcel acres, and this is how the default number of where your water allocation comes from, and then it shows for each parcel what GSA you're in and what the rules are for that GSA. So for this parcel in particular, there's 100.3 parcel acres with a 2.5 acre-foot per acre allocation, give you that 215 acre-feet. And then there are other, I guess, auxiliary supplies that go into that allocation. So as a reminder, ET is just this is going to be a summation of, one of the drawbacks of ET is it doesn't say how much groundwater was pumped. It's just everything that came off the field. So some fraction of that will be from surface water, some fraction that will be from precipitation. So we have to back calculate those numbers. So we look at that total water supply, add on precipitation, add on the surface water deliveries to get your, or in this case, subtract off from the water consumed to get that groundwater, default groundwater allocation. So, so in this case, you have your default water allocation plus rainwater is equal to your total allocation for this year. And the reason it's low for the mid-kaweah is because we started our allocation on May 1st to September 30th. So I'm shocked this is even greater than 0. In the way billing works, and this is probably where Matt's going to step in and talk about this more, is for each GSA, one landowner owns multiple parcels, it'll always draw from the cheapest water. So if two adjacent landowners, one landowner uses 3 acre-feet per acre, one uses 1 acre-feet per acre, one doesn't go into the mitigation tier, and then the next one just uses native. We always go for cheapest water. It's total sum of water, as long as it's within a 5-mile radius within the same GSA. So we'll pull from native first, then tier 1. And that it's probably going to have a few discussion points for how the water market is managed. So that's how it's managed right now.
And that's how it's managed.
Lawyers have no choice in the mid, it just defaults to that.
Right now, it just defaults. Now, that's a good point. Craig brings in the East kaweah, they can pick and choose. You can mix and match and decide.
Default order if you don't choose anything, but
You can say you want to use, you can literally physically use groundwater, but burn a surface water credit. Right. So it just, you can pick and choose whatever fits your portfolio. So
This is the mid-kaweah's.
it actually has both.
Can we go to
So
the top, James?
we have mid and greater, because TID has property in mid and greater. So we have greater kaweah acreage, but it's zeroed out for right now because this year there wasn't a.
Yeah.
Yeah, so next year the rules will be loaded and we'll get but there'll be different rules.
This is the dashboard that you use in your mid-kaweah.
Everybody's using it. Yeah, yeah.
Everyone, yeah. And so what's I think the most important
So
part,
this is this is the dashboard that we're all using then,
Yeah,
correctly?
Kaweah Subbit, yeah.
For the quiz
So
today.
some
Okay, I
growers,
just want to make sure because somebody had told me, like I said, I've missed several meetings and stuff. Somebody told me they took precipitation off the dashboard.
they did for the greater Kaweah. So because greater Kaweah, you guys are still trying to figure out how to account for the, so if for right now, just to be safe, I think it was removed.
Yeah, well, it says
Yeah.
coming soon. It just says not currently available. So there's still some.
Yeah, because that's kind of the thing, I mean, because they were saying, well, Land IQ builds that into it. And the precipitation into the ET calculations, and I was wondering, why is it then here?
They technically don't, right, they don't build it in, they give you the precipitation. So you get an ET reading and you get a precipitation reading. They don't deduct them or.
well, actually, and here's one of the things that was sort of eye-opening for me is that if you're using ET-based remote sensing, if it rains, it automatically estimates that your water use went up. You could not pump a drop. If it rains, your ET goes up, so it says your water use goes up. So you have to subtract the rain out of your water use, right? And so it will need to be there. It will need to be there for greater, but it's not.
So that's why I'm trying to figure out is why isn't it? You know what I'm talking about? Because I don't see us doing the same thing in two different GSAs. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about in terms of the way it's being displayed.
I think for right now, because your window starts, well, it started on the 1st, I think it's just coming, I would envision. But
Well,
because
somebody told me, and I didn't notice it before, somebody told me the precipitation was on that, and then it got removed.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So you had it, but then you didn't.
yeah. Well, I mean, the point is that it should be the same for all. The methodology.
I think if Eric's still with us,
We're getting bogged down in stuff
I
that
know.
has nothing to do with it.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
No problem, but I
Yeah.
just.
Yes,
you
we're
know,
gonna naively
I think
assume it will
there's
be.
someplace you can get your answer. We got.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some things that are still being discussed right now. Joe, I sent you a text. Just give me a call after, okay? We can talk about it.
Sure, not a problem.
So go to the top, James. So what's interesting, these bottom two, so first of all, notice that this is one user, but this user has parcels in the mid-kaweah and parcels in the greater kaweah, and they are shown separately because the allocation is separate. And what this committee decided last time is that we would initially just have separate markets, right? Since this committee is going to suggest a market structure that can get a thumbs up or thumbs down from each GSA, we're going to assume that in that first year, we're only trading within the GSA, right? And so you see one user has two different accounts, one for the mid-kaweah, one for the greater. The stuff that James showed you down below is important information about parcel specific characteristics that give us the water supplies. When you go back to the top, what really matters for the sake of the water market is in that water accounting, go up a little higher. I want to see what that table was called, the water account summary table, right? Water supply is important, 251 acre feet in the mid-kaweah, and then usage to date, 28.1.24, right? So these are two critically important ones. What a market participant needs to know is on the sell side, how much water do they have available to sell, right? And so we're going to propose an additional column which says water available for transfer, right? That you can transfer to somebody else. Obviously, as usage to date gets closer and closer to water supply, you're thinking on the buy side, okay, I'm going to need to buy water to increase my water supply. And so we're going to have a water available for transfer. Which could be as simple as, so obviously, if you could trade all three buckets, if you could trade native, if you could trade tier 1, if you could trade tier 2, your water available for trade would very simply be water supply minus usage to date. That would be the number, right? And so we have this restriction that we're only going to allow individuals to transfer their native yield. And so if you look down here below, that mid-kaweah user has native yield of 84.3 acre feet. And so hypothetically, they can transfer in any given year, as long as they haven't used that native yield, it's unpumped, they can transfer up to 83 acre feet per year. And so the water available for trade will be the smaller of water supply minus usage to date or native. It'll be the minimum of those two calculations, whichever one is smaller. Okay, so if you haven't pumped the native, you can sell up to 84 acre feet. So this does become really important in terms of how an individual understands what water they have available for transfer and or what they need. And so obviously in an auction, a very logical rule would be they cannot submit an offer to sell more than whatever that water available for trade is. Right, the market rule should not allow that offer if it exceeds their water available for trade. And so, for example, in Fox Canyon, we actually have our accounting data, we call it the data portal. The data portal is linked to the trading platform so that it actually will not allow them to enter an amount greater than their water available for trade. It's not possible. And so it can also be an honor system. A simpler method is just let them submit, and if it's greater than their water available for trade, the offer is rejected.
That sounds fine to me early in the season.
Yeah.
But when you get later in the season, it basically, because it's the native, it's a third, it's only that last third, right?
Yeah, that,
and since it runs in arrears, your water usage runs
30 days in
30
arrears.
days in arrears.
Well, actually, as we learned,
It seems like
45 or 60. 45 or
it
60.
seems like you shouldn't be allowed to trade all of that.
So this is a question. So
at the end.
this is one of our decision
Or
points. So
then
let's
you-
have that discussion. Or are they simply subject to surcharge? What is the rule? Because we have this problem, whereas we are going to build a trading system based on water use data that arrives with a 45 to 60 day lag. And so we need to decide how we're going
We're
to,
pushing them to get that better.
Well,
but at best it will be 30 days. It won't be better than 30 days. Will it?
Yeah. And the other thing is so what we're saying is that you can trade your native yield. So then you can just use transitional water in lieu of that then and start paying for transitional water. So as long as you're selling your native yield for more than your transitional water, then you're.
It makes sense,
running
right?
ahead.
Yep, exactly.
Or you,
On the landowner, because if they trade out too much and then the usage comes in, they're either gonna have to find to bring water back into them, or they're gonna pay or lose next year's allocation or what have it.
Or both, or
So
pay
they're
and.
they're gonna take care of themselves if they screw up.
So this is to answer.
and everybody's gonna do it.
So that's an answer.
And everybody's gonna do it.
So Chuck, that's an answer to your question. Is that satisfactory? That we're gonna say we have the limitation that data arrives with a lag. If someone sells 83 acre feet and it turns out in the last 30 days they actually pumped some of that, they're just gonna have to pay and lose allocation next year. Is that a satisfactory answer?
Or they go get transfers to make up for it.
Tier 2 and tier 1 and 2. And then if it exceeds that, then it would go
Yeah.
into the.
No, of course. Yeah,
Yeah, you
absolutely.
do have that buffer
Yeah.
if you decide not to use your tier
Of
1 or
course,
tier 2,
yeah.
you're right.
Right, but so what I'm more interested in is what if somebody pumps 166 acre feet? So they have pumped all their tier 1 and all their tier 2.
And then
All they have is native, and they sell 80.
And then they're in tier 3 and they pay the penalties
Yeah,
and they
right.
lose the water.
Yeah, and they might not learn, at the margin, they might not learn that, oh gosh, I went over 5 acre feet until
But I guess
45 days.
I guess that's a reasonable check because it should net everything out. Because if you go over, you lose it in the future year. So it does net out.
Yeah.
An over pump in 1 year nets out a reduction in pumping in a
And it
future
creates an
year.
incentive
Yeah.
for them to give
Yeah.
themselves a buffer, right?
But it's-
As long as there's, but if you have to actively go out and try and collect money from people, it's gonna be
A nightmare.
Enormous problem. So to me, what should happen, they lose their yield for the next year, but there needs to be some sort of, it doesn't have to be a lot, even if it's a 10% penalty that they lose.
On water supply or dollar?
Water supply.
No.
Or they can choose to pay,
Oh,
if they don't pay the actual physical, whatever you decide,
the money is one thing. It's really the loss of water that will cause.
it's the loss of water that is gonna be the teeth in this thing.
Yeah, sure. But what is the system for collecting?
Invoice. I mean, it's just
It's just
invoicing.
okay.
Yeah. invoicing in Marco.
Marseille's come in, they're gonna have to deal with that.
So
I'm 100% planting trees. I'm gonna be a buyer, so this is gonna be my problem, but I'm just, you want it to thank you for it.
Yeah, because if it fails, then it fails for everybody.
Fails for everybody.
And you have if you go to the Explorer usage, you have all your history on there also. So if you're permanent trees,
Yeah,
you can see what you did last year in each month.
yeah.
So
That'll work starting next year.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. But you want this year to kind of work too, not people to go out and sell water.
Right. But
And then there's.
it
some
has last year's
benefits.
usage on also already.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And, but Chuck's got a good point there, because in all I think. So really,
If there's no penalty for overselling it, just a little bit comes out of next year. Then you basically put in a carry or a, not a carry program, but a where you can use next year's allocation with no penalty.
so
I think that penalty does occur because you go into the tier 3, you lose that water the future year, plus you pay that $500 an acre foot or whatever the case is.
That's why you guys have talked about a time period at the end for trades.
to true up.
You can almost true up if you did oversell yourself and now all of a sudden you need more.
Yeah. Yeah.
To where you avoid the penalties and the.
You guys are
loss
much smarter
allocation.
than me at figuring out what it is.
I think what's gonna happen is everybody's gonna figure out if they go over, they go into the penalty block, and it's gonna, because it hurts pretty darn bad, because if you know you're over in one year and you go a smidge over in the next year, you're done. Right? Then you're in real
Yeah.
trouble.
And by the way, this is also why there's, what we're talking about is trying something for a year, reevaluating, saying, do we need it? Because we're gonna learn.
Yeah, well, and you already have this framework in place.
Yes.
And it's pretty much the same everywhere, right?
So there's probably some things that we need to create a secondary list that are elements to reevaluate upon the completion of year 1.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
penalty for overage is one of them.
Yeah, and I think I've told you a long time ago, to be effective and to avoid this kind of gaming of the allocation system, you want the penalty to really bite. It's $2,500 an acre foot in Fox Canyon. It's not $500.
Well, see, but that's the interesting part, is because the GSA, all of our legal counsels have indicated that Sigma limits the penalty to $500.
And so ours was, so again, it may be because we're a
But the
special.
economics of what
Maybe
you're
because
growing
we're a
in
special
Fox
action.
Canyon are entirely different.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Majority protest
$500
bill.
here is just as much
Okay,
as $2,500.
Fair enough. Okay,
in
fair enough.
Fox
Fair enough. All right.
Maybe more.
Well, to your point too, I think the losing the allocation next year is a big.
And we all have that in our programs right now. When you go over, now we have a mitigation block that's going to be disappearing, but above that, there is a pretty big hit. And that was driven internally by the growers, knowing that if you don't put that in there, you just pay to play.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah. Okay.
We're going to go backwards.
Okay. So again,
That's a problem up in Chowchilla right now. They set it at $100, right?
Oh, really? It's $100?
Up in Madera, that's
Oh,
what
yeah,
the
yeah.
problem they're having.
Yeah.
They set the overage at $100.
so you'll pay it as an operating expense.
Yeah, just keep them.
You got
$100, I'll go buy it.
So any questions about the dashboard? Because then we're going to come back to my slide presentation and address some of these questions. There's literally one saying, how do we handle the lag and water use data?
Everybody here, Sophie, have you seen maybe just show the Explorer usage so she can see what we're delivering to the growers. So again, ours is kind of wonky because we're looking at we're looking at a pond, so it makes no sense. But not to give anybody any personal information. I gotta get on Wayne because we're eating on our weeds. So
That's all rainfall.
yeah, we got all rainfall. So a grower is delivered annual monthly time step ET values. So you can use it as a planning tool, a forecasting tool, as well as a backcasting tool to see what your cropping patterns may have been. So if you're in an annual crop program, you can determine how you're going to make that portfolio. If you're a permanent crop, it's it's just changing your irrigation patterns. And we are seeing that currently today where growers are adjusting their irrigation patterns and we are reducing our ET. And so like I'm telling the mid-kaweah board, we put the ship up and we're correcting it now. But we're not doing it in big sweeps. We're just kind of turning it in the right direction. But I think everybody's responded very well to this.
James, is that mislabeled? Is this total year-to-date evapotranspiration? Why isn't it increasing?
There's no.
It's mislabeled. This is year to date, and it looks like it just doesn't update. when we
Oh, I
post.
see, yeah. So that's the monthly ET, right?
Yeah,
That's monthly, and then, okay, now that's accumulative.
Yeah, great.
we're finding all sorts of bugs in here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Found another one.
So we just want to give.
Yeah,
I
so go back
think-
to the front page, 'cause the last thing I want them to see is that front page before we, unless people have questions about this. So what matters for the water market strategy is that one table, water account summary table. It needs to have some additional information. What is your water available for transfer?
in your native yield supply too. And Joe, that's a very good point that you always bring up, that each GSA has to make the decision whether or not they're going to do this or not. And then underlying that decision is, do you want the water dashboard to be used as the tool? I mean, I put it this way, I haven't found an argument why you wouldn't do it.
Right.
But somebody, if you're going to move to a third-party administrator, maybe there might be some reason that the GSAs and the third-party administrator decide that they want a secondary program. It just seems odd. I don't think
What
you
would be the
guys.
source of the data?
Yeah, it was-
Unless there are
I don't
meters.
think we're,
Yeah,
we're not, I mean, we're on board with
using
the
this. Yeah.
dashboard, of course, yeah. I mean, even we're developing one for our dish companies
Yep.
so that we can nexus with
This one.
this one.
Yep.
Sure.
But just to give you guys just fair warning that we're not forcing the water dashboard to be it, but if you would like it, we can get it prepared for that.
Well, I just had a question about the other, and then Eric texted me, said he'll explain what happened.
And so I will say this, though, that obviously some water use information is critical to functioning water market. People need to understand what's the status of my water use and how do I know that the person offering to sell me water has water available to transfer to me. Right, so you need to know what the status is. You need to know that they know the status of their use. And so this is sort of the bare minimum, right? The challenges with this are measurement error, because ET tends to systematically overstate water use by agricultural pumpers. And second is the time lag, right? But so this is the minimum of what's needed. I don't know how you do this without water accounting dashboard or something more robust.
Aaron, I haven't spent a lot of time on this, but are there any tools in there that, if you plug in the planted acres and so forth, it will allow you to extrapolate your water for the rest of the season?
No, but I think that is a tool that I think I've heard numerous growers tell us, say it's like and Thule has one. It's a neat little spreadsheet tool, right? It's basically, you can put in, I have 1,000 acres and I want 500 acres of corn and 500 acres of pistachios. What does my water budget look like? So that's a future tool.
Okay. But there's something out there commercially available.
Well,
Who is it?
Thule has one on their website. You can
Yeah, I
just-
think anyone could use.
Yeah,
it.
you just download the spreadsheet and you can plug it in.
Eastern Tule's got
The
one.
reality of it is, though, is, everybody's ETs are not going to be exactly the same, soil types, and cultural practices, those kinds of things and so on. But I think for the most part, they're pretty standard. I mean, it's book values. Anybody could.
Well, actually, these are different than book values. So these are imagery based on energy calculations off signatures.
No, I understand that. I understand they do ground truthing and so
Yeah.
on to make sure that it's correct and whatnot. But I'm saying that their data and so on, for the most part, is pretty well set.
So
In other
you
words,
can
that
use
almonds
that.
use approximately so much.
Because the data that
There's a
you,
range.
the data that you put out before and advocating for Land IQ to do this, that's all available, right?
Correct. Correct.
So a grower could, in theory, go in and look.
That's
and
what
say, This
right.
is sort of our lean point.
That they used that crop report, and then it gave you every single crop in the district and its averages, and then everybody said, well, okay, here's my averages, and here's what you guys are giving me. I'm going to go plant X, Y, Z.
Mhm.
And it had highs and lows too.
Correct. It gave you the
Give you
range.
range.
Yeah.
And the only thing it didn't do is it didn't parse out the young versus the old, but you had the high and the low.
But if you're in July trying to figure out whether you need to go to the market to cover the end of the year. You're only really looking at that little piece, so you can go.
Yeah, yeah.
actually look at that.
You're gonna use that Explore data usage and I'm in July, oh shoot.
I think very long answer. If people are motivated enough, they can get within 10 or 15%. And that's probably close enough.
So then, as a water marketing strategy, do we want to impose that if you trade at the beginning of the year, it's 100% a native yield. If you trade at the end of the year, it's only 85%? Or is it enough to say the incentives are for them to figure it out?
I think as long as you have the penalties in place, why further restrict
I agree.
it?
Yeah, and it's simpler.
Yeah.
It's so much simpler to implement.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, great. I'm with you. Great. Okay. All right. So real
I don't want any more complicated things in my life.
So looking at the third thing here first is that obviously we need some entry in that accounting spreadsheet at the top, the user account information, which says water, which gives them their water available for cat trade. I was going to show you a hypothetical user with allocation, but we just did that with the 83 acre feet for that individual. There's some other, we need a functionality. We need the ability to update supply net of transfers. So currently, the water accounting dashboard doesn't have an entry for purchased or sold allocation, right? Somebody's allocation in the accounting dashboard needs to be updated after transfers take place because it affects their supply. And then lastly, we also need location information where when you create your user account and you list the APNs, we're actually going to need to know the location of those and not we, the corporate we. You will need to know, the GSA needs to know that which management areas those parcels are associated with, so that we know when you're impacted by a trigger, when that user is impacted by the trigger, right? And so that's a mapping exercise. And it also raises another question, which is complex, that we need to chat about, which is, so how does the trigger work if an individual has APNs in 2 management areas? How is that individual affected? So I'm going to go back up here. So what if you have an APN in 30 and an APN in 31?
The same ownership.
Same ownership, so you have one account, and that account, since the allocation is pooled across those parcels, that account is a water market participant, right? And so how does the trigger work when they have a well in 30 and they have a well in 31?
So in the background of the water dashboard,
Yeah.
it is actually loaded in by APN.
Right.
You just don't see it that way.
Yep.
We can discretize it into the APN. You just don't, we just didn't, there's not enough real estate on a screen to show you all that.
No,
So
but my point is that the water market participant is not an APN. It's an owner, right, who may have multiple APNs.
But isn't the market transfer going from the APN of the owner?
I think it's going
Goes
from
from the owner
it's
account.
going from one person's, I think, so let's,
Count.
I think it's going from one person's allocation to another person's allocation, and the
so it's
allocation
bucket
is,
to bucket, it's big bucket
it's
to
big bucket to big bucket. And I don't know how you could do it. It would be so difficult.
You would literally have to list out
Oh,
like the
it'd be
entire
brutal. Now,
APN.
not only do you have to choose, am I taking from the native bucket? Am I taking from the native bucket on this parcel or the native bucket?
Right.
Like, so the account is the water market participant, and that's how we do it in Fox Canyon. And it works fine. But it raises this challenge. What
Yeah.
if you have an APN into management? And the way we handle it is not satisfactory to all, which is that if you have a well in 30 and a well in, we're wells, your APNs. If we have a well in 30 and a well in 31, and 30 hits the trigger, it also affects your well in 31.
Yeah,
You're treated as if all your wells are in 30.
You defaulted to the.
Yeah. And that is unsatisfactory. This, obviously, that's a trade-off. That's a big trade-off.
Yeah, and what happens when I'm not, I don't know this, but if you have a well in 30 and you also own property in 17U, which is a completely different GSA, you can take it anywhere you want it.
No, what's
Yeah, no,
nice
no.
is the dashboard separates those into 2 different accounts.
Okay, so that does get separated.
Correct.
So it's just not separated in terms of parcels or management areas.
Correct.
So how hard would it be to separate it into management areas?
Well, again, I think that makes it more difficult because now when someone's transferring water, they have to say the management area especially means they have to tell me which APN it's being transferred, and that becomes really
It
complicated.
doesn't have to be done by management zone. If there's a trigger in effect in the management zone, it would not allow movement of water into it.
Well, so for example, if you have a parcel in 30 and a parcel in 31, and again, we know there's no DAX in 30, but for the sake of argument, a shallow municipal well goes dry in 30, it would mean that because you have a well in 30, you can no longer trade even off your parcel in 31.
So if you had a home and 20 acres in that area and your farm is 500 acres. in the
Somewhere
next
else,
one,
you're screwed.
If it's one
you're
account, if it's
completely tied up.
currently one account, yeah. So the rule would be, you could say, okay, well then people need to be
Growers set up different. multiple
forward thinking and create separate accounts at the beginning of the water year. Yep.
That's a mess too.
Yep.
You're just gonna unbundle the nice package
Right.
that you have now, and then it's gonna be a nightmare.
And you're probably not, because you like the flexibility of being able to move water between your APNs.
And
And so you've got it's all by parcel. The parcels could be tagged by zone or by management area.
you can add it to the.
Because the GSA is gonna have the final say so on a proven transfer into a certain management area that may be at MTs. So we've gotta have that worked into where that's,
To me, there are some of these questions that need to be put on the table, but don't need answers today. They
Yep.
need more thoughtful discussion
Yep.
later
And-
on.
and
This
input
is
from
less
the-
of a trading issue than it is just
Logistics.
it's a proven, it's a
whole water budget program.
Well,
it's
and
not
actually,
a trading deal, it's an approval of the trades. Because the GSA is not gonna wanna just let it go wherever.
well, here's the other one that we struggle with in Fox Canyon is that the accounting system allows you to move it between your own APNs. And so one of the things we've struggled with is we now have a system where the water market rules are more stringent
Than the transfer rules,
than the
internal.
internal transfer rules, right? So for example, we have folks who have a parcel in 30, a parcel in 31, parcel in 30 hits the trigger, and they can still move the water back and forth within their own account. So that, in other words, they can increase their pumping in 30 as much as they want, as long as it comes from one of their own APNs
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Well, and all they have to do is they have to go lease the ground somewhere else.
Yeah, and transfer it within their own, yeah.
I need more water there for this year and it's illegal to move it, so I'm gonna go.
And actually,
lease the ground
so
somewhere
exactly what you're talking about, that gaming is happening on a very large scale, where people are accumulating leases.
else. I'm honest, I just have a criminal mind.
So
that's a-
by management zones.
We're gonna have to,
And that
because the
seems like the logical thing, if it's the same owner but within a zone. But right now, the owner has to make that decision to do it, right?
Well, but the trick.
Well,
The GSAs, I'll give you a perfect example. So East Kaweah just put a physical hard cap for every management area, every parcel you own of 2.5 acre feet, no matter how many transfers you have. So you can't, if you own in 17U, 10U, and 9U, and you want to move something over, well, you got the boundary issue that Greater and East are gonna have to prove that transfer coming from Greater to East or vice versa. But you're physically, like the management area itself is physically limited on how much water can come
You
in,
can't go above the 2.5 on it per acre.
no matter if you have it or not.
So then, can you even buy allocation under any circumstances?
You might have to, because
Right
they.
now, we
they
can
only-
trade
yeah.
native and all the tiered water, but you've got a physical hard cap of 2.5 just because we're so close to MTs or at MTs.
So it's basically, they've put that barrier up around the management zone that
Ahead of
you're
the
using as a trigger for other reasons here, right?
Well, it sounds like the minute we open this thing, they will hit the trigger, right? Anyway, yeah.
So there's something
Right.
that's.
Never have a
So the
market.
challenge,
Yeah,
Well,
this doesn't get a mark.
so the challenge with this is that if you
We
say,
sell
okay,
it.
we're gonna break up the accounts by management area, you're then taking away a certain degree of flexibility from parcels under common ownership. Now you're saying, not only can you not trade it in the market, you can't trade it out, you can't even transfer it among your own parcels.
Within that management zone,
Right.
because that management zone is shut down. So like, okay.
Yeah.
Use it there.
Right, and so I would say this, so having one set of rules that applies to all transfers is really important, or else you end up with all kinds of perverse incentives.
Well,
So-
can a person leave it up to the grower to determine whether or not they want to specify, in other words, if they want to allocate it into one, one basically zone or into multiples and parse it out?
Problem is, if you don't do it at the beginning of the water year,
Yeah.
if you're allowing people to change that all the time.
No, I'm talking about at the beginning of the water
Yeah,
year.
okay.
You said,
Tell us where.
you tell us this is where we're going to allocate the water, because then maybe your cropping is changing.
Yeah.
Or something.
So this is
Well, the
almost,
RCAP could be put into all those management areas and parcels at the beginning of the water year for the east, right? You just have a set limit in the background that as you're trying to move stuff around, it'll flag something and say that's.
That's another one.
Yeah, but again, the trick. Yeah, we'd have to think long and hard about how that would work with somebody's offer to sell and somebody's purchase allocation. Can they, like, the worst thing you can have is someone buys allocation and then they realize, oh my God, I'm not gonna be able to pump it. Right?
on accident.
And then they're gonna
because
say, I paid all this money, and they're gonna come and they're gonna say, your water market.
it
You
is-
may not be able to pump in that year.
That
If you
year,
got
but
too
you
much,
could- you could
you'll
roll
carry
over
it
next
and
year.
and pump the next year.
But if they're trying to finish a crop, you're still gonna hear from them that the water market wasn't
Not in the
transparent. No.
Kaweah, they're gonna be happy to have it the next year.
Okay.
I think.
Because
I think
that
so,
cap,
too.
You'll pump over it and then it's gonna deduct you from next year anyway. I mean,
Unfortunately,
You're gonna need to be looking
You-
for
you-
stuff anyway.
yeah.
So you've already, you pre-purchased what you're gonna get.
I've never seen the prices of those things go down, so you're
So
just.
is that a
pre-buying.
policy that mid or greater is considering, or that?
Not yet, because they're not as dire as we are, where
An area.
in regards to water levels yet.
Yeah.
No, we're headed towards that direction.
So. Because I've got ground in east, greater and mid-kaweah and in multiple zones, and we have lots of family members. So
Maybe we ought to bring up your account.
things are under different names, but, so to me, the solution, I think is, the growers need to at least have that option, or at least be, educated to where they can put something, set up, each one of those dashboards within one of each zones. And then if they want to transfer, from 31U to 33U, they have to go through the same process that you would on the water market.
So the transfers go through the
You have to
same.
still, you still have to report through the market, but it's basically a non-monetary transfer.
It's interesting you say that
Related,
because
what they call related rate transfer.
it's interesting you say that because I literally have some of the growers calling me that are large like you're, and they have different entities, but it's all one family. And they literally are using the water market to trade it for monetary value between the various corporations.
Sure.
So they have to have a mechanism and a value. So they're literally selling it from brother to brother. But at that, the market keeps it fair
Yeah.
between the two brothers, is essentially what they're telling me.
Sure.
So they're gonna use the market for their own family.
Yeah.
Is what they're planning to do. So I think now to avoid the issue, what if at the beginning of the season, a grower, in order to participate in the market, has to identify preload, and so like you said, you're gonna need on the table, you're gonna need it to go out this far. This is just your allocation, and then here's your water market table over here. So you say, I'm gonna move that native yield, I'm gonna use that in the market. So you're predetermining where and how you're.
What I'm
gonna-
sayand is what you actually do is you need to create a bunch of new rows.
Yeah, that's
So
what,
right now it's mid-kaweah and greater. It's gonna need to be mid-kaweah A, mid-kaweah B, mid-kaweah C. And you're creating those accounts. The problem is,
A,
I
B,
don't
and
think
C
you
would be
need to
zone
do that.
29,
I
30,
think you leave it.
31.
I think you leave it like that, and you leave it up to the grower to log out, log back in, and,
and move it.
and move it. They can, trust me, as important as this is, people are gonna be fine. Or you have multiple accounts and you just bring one up at a time.
Again, the luxury of what we decided to do, which is gonna probably keep it so that we can be a little bit more thoughtful about it, is we're only doing the native yield. So it's a 10-inch. So we'll see where these issues are gonna arise. If we allowed 2.5 feet to go transfer, we're in trouble right away.
But all these like, processing portals, like our portal for our grower, if a grower has 5 entities,
they log in and then it's got 5 entities and then they just pick on one. They don't have to completely redesign because 95% of the time it's just gonna be one.
Yeah, no, I agree. But
And it simplifies how you're doing it.
okay, and so in this case, what we're proposing is that you could take your family's parcels and break it up into as many separate accounts as you want at the beginning of the water year.
I don't think you should be allowed to have multiple accounts within one zone.
Sure, fair enough, right.
Down to the
level,
zone
yeah.
level, you
Yeah,
can break
yeah,
it down that
yeah.
far.
But then do you, but I think if I hear you right, you don't have to break it down to the management zone. You could keep them aggregated, but then these restrictions would apply. If one of your APNs is in a DAC zone, none of those on
If
account.
you choose to do that, you're rolling the dice.
Okay, all right, I like that.
That makes sense.
What's nice too then is that it creates an incentive for,
Aaron, you yelled at by people who made the wrong decision.
That's why I chuckled. I'm like,
Right.
oh, great.
but what's nice is
I
it
know
creates
the
an
first phone call I'm
incentive
gonna get is.
for you to think more regionally, more locally, and break it down into thoughtful groups. Right?
Well, and it also.
You already have a tag on what zone it's in. And just give them an option when they're logged in, then pick all their parcels to have the option to break it down by management area.
So the
or
trick,
zone or whatever.
and it sounds like on some of the east ones, it's not an option. You're gonna have to do it that way, right?
Well, I mean, we're still all gonna use the dashboard, but what I'm saying is they can already tag every parcel that's in the dashboard by a management area or zone.
Yeah.
Just tag it and then give the option to the user on the dashboard to pick the button and say, I want to see everything by management zone. And then just make your trades.
No, but, you know, the only issue is that for the east and the mid, the lines are fairly discrete. It's gonna get all wonky in that splice in the grader, because it's all, and Eric and I are already dealing with the nightmare of like diagonal lines.
Well, I know. We all are, right?
4U and 5U where the management zone doesn't match the GSA boundary too.
Oh, yeah, you got that nightmare.
It'd be nice to get to that too. Greg.
I mean,
agree
that's
with
where we,
ultimately, that's where you want to go, but.
Let's start with the block and then, yeah.
Start with what you have, yeah.
Again, maybe can we leave this item? I mean, we had a
Yeah, you
really
bet.
good discussion, but
Yeah.
I think we came up with a soft answer of
Yeah.
letting the landowners block it together. But I don't know if we land on that yet.
Well, the other one you need to think is, because this is a fundamental question, who is a water market participant? Right, and we're getting at this. So is it all the family members and all their parcels? But then how do you apply these triggers, right? Or is a market participant all of the related APNs within a management area, right?
Well,
And is it one thing for some growers, a different thing for others? And then how does the GSA and the exchange administrator keep track of all that?
Well,
Right?
it's even more complicated, like Chuck was lining out, is what somebody's gonna game the system, they're just gonna go lease a piece of ground and.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, they are going to gain the system.
yeah, when they game the
We're
system.
living it.
But the problem is that we need what I realize now is we need a toggle in the system where the landowner gives authority, because the leasee cannot market a landowner's share unless there's an acknowledged.
But that's easy to get. And so actually, this is new information last month. Fox Candy was looking at this, because this is the new issue that's emerged, because we have this robust market with all these protections, is that they were able to increase pumping in one of these management zones 8.5% by acquiring leases outside the management zone.
So we just have to figure that, protect it.
Because your only leverage is against the landowner.
Right.
The landowner leases it to somebody.
Yeah.
And then the leasee goes and makes a mess.
And then moves,
Yep. All right.
You were asking about who can participants and so on. Let me ask you this. I'm just going to throw out a hypothetical. What if, so we generate in the greater Kaweah, maybe we generate $20 million in pumping fees, or $30 million in pumping fees, or whatever. And we decide we want to get in the market and we want to retire ground vis-a-vis the market, as opposed to doing a reverse auction. Is that a plausible and possible idea? And what is the thoughts? What are the thoughts here?
Currently, you could only retire your native field. Couldn't retire tier 1 and tier 2.
Eventually it gets there, I think.
Tier 1 and tier 2 are gonna go away.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
and
yeah, eventually.
We're never gonna get to
They're going away.
like that.
They're going away.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we land, so we'll put a placeholder there. So this, and the question is as fundamental as who is a market participant, right? What's the scale? Is it only APNs within a management area? What if it's APNs that span management areas? How do we handle that? So that's a question we'll revisit. I think we've landed the plane on this one, right? How do we handle the lag water usage where it's on the water user to plan ahead and know that they're relying on old data and they continue water use. I think that one's, and that the penalties and the loss of allocation once you get into tier 3 is a significant incentive.
I had a text from Eric and so on, going back to the map. Why are the colors on the map the way they are, where the greater Kaweah is a diverse number of colors?
Yeah, so
What was the reason?
So the only color that I added was the orange. So all of those orange management areas were the same light green that the rest of the greater is.
It was for discussion purposes.
Yeah.
You just colored it in to use that as.
I said hypothetically, we could group all these management areas into this trading zones, all the orange.
So there was an agreement that you wouldn't do 39 management, 39 market areas. And then the engineering team tried to define, here would be a market area. And
So these are all hypothetical.
That's
Hypothetical,
It
yeah.
was for example.
Yep.
Only in the last meeting saying, okay, you could have all of these or you could have 2.
Yeah.
Right? Something like that.
But the other colors, like the light blue and the gray, those were there. Those are obviously the gray.
And the option for the GSAs was to define what they would see as being that defined market area for their area based on whatever decisions they need to make.
And so to give you a sense too, one of the hypotheticals is that every single management area in the greater is initially orange. And then they only start getting pulled out when one of the triggers is hit. Or it might be that,
So in other words, everything would be one color, as you're saying, and then a management area that, because of a DAC violation or something, gets
Yeah.
highlighted. and
Correct.
pulled out.
yeah, and actually, I apologize, I should have
And that
brought
would
in.
be the same with the mid or the east.
Yeah, and what we did last month is actually, this one turned green when it hit it got pulled out when it hit a trigger. So, yeah, but just hypothetical. So
Okay.
we'll get guidance on what the logical initial grouping is. It may be very big, or it may be a small number of trading zones. All right, so we landed that one. So this one, Craig, I've already talked about. So one question I wanted to ask is, so if you run a monthly auction, transfers happen. Is it the vision of the system that then, after they're matched and you learn, oh, you're receiving a transfer of this many acre feet, you have to submit a piece of paperwork to the GSA, and the GSA will individually approve each of those transfers? Or is it a more streamlined or automated process for approving those market-based transfers? And obviously you're saying each one.
Right now, the rules in the east and the greater are that the east or the greater is approving the transfers, right?
Everyone?
Individually. So you'll look at a form for a particular transfer from this. So does that exclude, because another question, a related question down below is do you want, in the auction, do you want partial matching? Like if I need to get you 100 acre feet and I can't find someone with 100 acre feet, can I get you 20 from one person, 30 from another, and 50 from a third person? Right? Because the auction, you can very easily facilitate that. Well, then that's 3, does that now mean there's 3 separate transfers that the GSA has to approve to get him the water that he needs?
Probably, because they'd have to look at every account it's coming from,
They
which,
gotta look at Where the
I
water's
mean, I
coming
think
from.
eventually it gets more streamlined once we know the market's good, to where the GSA can pull away a little bit on that, other than
Okay.
knowing there's not a management area problem, but
So
for now, it's gotta just go to the.
You could have one
You
person,
have to do it that
you could have
way,
one
right?
person sending it out to
You
3
have a
different
DEC,
people,
you could have.
and it would only be one application,
Yeah.
because you're only concerned about where the water's leaving, not where it's going.
So Chuck, to answer your question, that the auction rules should handle the DAC as long as they know. So the point is that transfer should should never happen in the first place, right? And otherwise, we've failed in the construction of the rules, right? Now, the GSAs may still want to look at that. What we do in Fox Canyon, just as a counterpoint, is subject to the rules, transfers are pre-approved. So as long as the DAC's not impacted, as long as the other things, if the exchange administrator makes the transfer, allocations are immediately updated. And it is pre-approved subject to the rules, right? And so, so that is a streamlined process that's available. One thing I worry about is how long does it take? Do you have a sense? So if there's a monthly auction, can you even learn whether they've been approved before the next monthly auction?
I don't know. We'll have to see
Otherwise-
how many come in.
Auctions, right?
If the stack is like this, no. If the
Right.
stack is like this, yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
So these are just transaction costs. This increases the cost of doing business, and there's uncertainty involved, right?
And I think, I was telling Matthew, I think my concept of where you're at, like initially because of the concerns and to make sure that everybody kind of feels a comfort level that it is going to be a look, approve, go, look, approve. But over time,
Yep.
that individual is going to say, here's how we streamline it through the water dashboard. Right? And let the water dashboard run through a checklist really quick upon the transfer.
Yeah.
And then kick out the ones that have some more
Right. Yep.
issues.
So is it realistic to do a monthly auction if it requires transaction specific?
Well, you were talking about a few months up front and a few months at the end. I think
What I mean is if you do one in the front, can you do another one 30 days? Because I don't think you should do a second auction until you've cleared the market the first time.
You maybe do two at the front, 40 days,
Well,
5 days apart.
Yeah, or 60 days apart. Yeah.
And then you got a few months to think about whether you can automate it or not.
This gives you the first year to try things and you can always change it.
Maybe, I don't know.
I mean, James and I have talked about it before. There's no way that the mid-kaweah gets away without hiring more staff. And that this would be one of those programmatic things where that individual would, right after it gets approved, here's a stack of PDFs you need to go through. And you have 15 days to get through it. So.
And then how do you handle the end of the water year? If we're 45 days, someone doesn't know if they're going to have the water.
So it has to be well,
45 days till you know you got a problem.
then you got a
Right.
problem.
You probably need realistic, I've been thinking about this. You probably realistically need 30 days, whether that's when the auction is or 30 days to try and find water before the bill hits, right?
So we have two lags now. That we have the lag in the arrival of water use data, and now we have a lag in the administrative approval of the transfer. Right. And so I think
So if it's middle of November before you know your ET is all on the dashboard, so everybody can look at it. Give them 2 weeks to look at it, know they had a problem. You're realistically talking about almost the end of the year before you really want to send that final billing out.
So what we do is to adjust for it, we adjust the invoice. That's what's going to happen.
I think you're gonna learn a lot, whether you do 1, 2, or 3 auctions at the beginning of the
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
And then you have 5 months
okay, fair enough. Yeah.
to.
Well, we're probably going to be working in the second 6 months to begin with.
Yeah.
And your ET won't be near what it would have been in the prior months, but you're still gonna have significant enough ET that you're gonna wanna see that data before you decide how much water you potentially need to make up for a shortage.
And then is this, and maybe this is a legal question for the attorneys, is it a transfer form that a full GSA board has to approve? Is it an administrative action that staff member?
I think it's I think the director approves it in the east.
The transfer?
The executive director in the east approves it.
Oh, I thought you said, I thought you meant a director. I'm like, so you're gonna have a board member?
No.
So Mike's gonna sign off on it.
Okay, so you have an executive officer that is authorized to approve. Okay.
Yeah, so you have a staff member check it and then a GM sign it. I would say we're probably the same.
I think each GSA will
Figure it out.
determine how they want to handle it.
And then financial transactions, is it the sort of, so there's two strategies here. One is, again, if you're buying 100 acre feet, you're matched with 3 different people. Once they're matched, it's your job to communicate with the 3 and make payment. It can also be handled by, the exchange administrator can be a financial clearinghouse. You don't even need to know that you bought from 3 people. You just know you bought 100 acre feet.
I don't think people are gonna care.
So,
They might.
so you would, so the easiest would be to send it through the third-party administrator. So like the third-party administrator essentially becomes a bank or a,
Pass through.
Financial clearinghouse, yeah.
And then here, this is related to anonymity. We're gonna anonymize price information, price and quantity information. Do you also want to anonymize the counterparties? So if I match you with 3 sales, do you want to keep the identity of the counterparties anonymous? You never know who you're buying from. That necessitates the exchange administrator being a financial clearinghouse. That's the only way to.
I think that's
That's the cleanest way to do it.
Okay.
yeah, but how, so are we saying you can't do the opposite? Like, hey Chuck, I struck a deal out on the back of the truck.
Yeah.
Is that what we're eliminating? Because we're
Well,
going.
I think that you can already do that through these.
East is already gone.
Yeah, you can already do that.
So it's under the radar.
Well, that's
markets?
yeah. So they're allowing it. The question is whether you would also allow that.
Raiders rules allow it too,
Or
so.
if you needed to go through the formal exchange.
Well, I think the auction is anonymous, right?
Is a what?
Auction is anonymous.
But are we,
On both sides. But if there's, like the example somebody was using where they're 2 brothers, apparently they don't get along or they don't trust each other.
maybe that's typical.
They might be perfect candidates
Maybe
for
they
the
do.
anonymous.
I didn't know everybody's family was like mine. Well, you could just report a transaction and that's not anonymous.
So that's what I'm getting at. I mean, so there's actually a formal and a non-formal market.
Just by the
By
fact
default.
of the rules that have been
And I
approved.
think you're,
And 2 GSAs, it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, we do not, because our thought was our board was default to whatever the market is.
Yeah, and that was
Because
also,
that has the protections. So, so-
also the recommendation of our friend in Australia.
so the question becomes is for the other 2 GSAs, how is your informal market going to protect against the?
Because they still have to be approved by the executive director, so he's gonna review every transfer request to make sure it doesn't.
If you're willing to send it through the water dashboard that has all the checks, then it's all going to have that same. But that has to be a rule. You're going to send your informal transfers through the water dashboard.
I think everything's gonna end up being on the dashboard.
Yeah,
or
that's what I
Okay, so it's going to have the same, it's going to have, but are
or
you,
if it's this third-party administrator, they've just, when they're collecting the data, they have a checkbox for
that it's got it?
whether it's an auction transfer
Yeah.
or it's a related,
Yep.
non-auction transfer.
I guess from the GSA perspective, you'll just have to acknowledge that those transfers will be subject to these protection rules.
Yeah, and I would encourage you to not, you're gonna have big problems if the rules don't apply to those non-market transfers, to the related party transfer. They're not, they can move it from one corner of the GSA to another, whether they're in a disadvantaged community or not.
So
That's just, once we get this lined out, it's gotta go back to the GSAs to make sure they're
You have the same rules.
incorporating that, because right now, the rules that just got adopted just cover transfers. They don't have all the, only caveats are not creating an undesirable result, which would kind of cover into the DAX would be roped into that influence. It's just not as specific.
But it still does have to roll into the dashboard in order to keep the accounting correct.
Correct, it does, yeah.
So
Yeah, whether it goes straight to the GSA first with a piece of paper from 2 guys, they'll have to at least turn in the counts on the waters and that kind of stuff to get through the dashboard to make sure the
So we just,
The debiting and
dashboard
crediting.
then becomes the rules. It's the filter.
It can.
It can be, you're right. Or the third party administrator, but yeah, I get it.
And those 2 could be separate or integrated.
you could even do a block out where you allow, these transfers at any time, but you don't allow them within 15 days before or after, or some finite period of these auctions. So then all you have to deal with, the staff has to deal with on the approval process would be the auction one through a period of time. And they don't have to, but if, Fred wants to transfer some
His brother.
to his brother Barney, he can do that. He just can't do it in those blocked out windows.
But it has to be reported though, because
Well, it
otherwise.
still has to go.
It still has to be transacted through
It either
the,
has to go through the water dashboard or the portal to see if
Yeah,
it meets
if
the
they have-
criteria.
Yeah, because otherwise you can give some to your brother and then go on the portal and sell the stuff you gave to your brother.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, to do it at times other than when
the formal market.
the market.
Is it also, by the,
Form for brokering water though. Essentially, for brokerage.
No, because ultimately you're avoiding a broker because what you're doing is it's Chuck going over to Matt and going, hey, I need 2 acre feet or something. And they on the back of a truck go, yeah, I'll just write you a check for $100
well,
or
yeah, the
whatever.
transaction cost of a broker is so high. You're, by making this easier, you eliminate.
Well, I guess that's a good point is, does this committee want to even entertain what happens if a broker does get in between the two? Sophie's your broker. She brokers it and brings it to the third party administrator, who for all practical purposes is Matthew. Is that a model you guys want to allow in the Kaweah Subbasin?
Well, can I bring up another method perhaps? And that is vis-a-vis the water dashboard, that there be a form online there in sense that says, I want to broker this, I have this amount of water, and it automatically defines where the management zone is, et cetera. And then and it doesn't say who you are, it just says, I have X acre feet of such and such water here available for this season. or
That's
this
the auction.
period.
That's the auction.
That's exactly what we're
Yeah,
imagining.
but on the dashboard, and then the dashboard, then the buyers can anonymously go into that. It automatically, if the thing is approved, it pairs it off, it does the additions, the subtractions, and everything is done. We keep it to a minimum.
Yep, that's
The
exactly.
broker fee goes.
There's no brokerage
There's
fee.
no brokerage.
And
I
what's,
mean, it's just counted for in the sales price.
yeah, and what happens is you put it on the market and no one sees it and Chuck ends up buying it. And I'm the third party administrator. You're selling, he's buying, you put your money in, I pay you, and the water automatically gets transferred on. Yeah, so I think that's what we're talking about in the formal market.
Yeah, that's a flavor of the monthly auction that so the one thing I would
That's
say is,
exactly what
what you're talking about is a kind of auction that requires coincidence of needs. I want to buy all your water. He needs all of your water. You want to sell all your water. He needs all your water. Right? You can also structure the auction in a way that, again, if he needs 100 acre feet, I can automatically match him 30 from one person, 50 from
Well, that's what I'm saying is that we wouldn't have to match them, that you post it up there, that the system would look at it and do the fulfillment.
Yep, sure. Right.
So,
Yeah.
But there are gonna be people who say, hey, you're gonna need water, I'm gonna go find it for you. You're gonna pay me, but that's okay, it's just, like.
Well, that's what I'm just curious.
Actually,
I think that's an individual, they can do
Right,
that.
and then it
But-
reflects itself on the dashboard and the cost that they pay, because they had to pay the broker to do this for them. So it's just,
And I think that's fair.
I think it's good that there's more ways to do it. It's gonna make it a more fluid market.
regardless of the
Actually,
broker,
I
the
think- I actually
broker's
think
still
the
going
opposite-
to have to be
actually
able to
think the opposite is true.
articulate vis-a-vis the dashboard with authority from the buyers and the sellers
Right.
to do that for
But you
their
could use
behalf.
but
the
it's like,
broker.
it's exactly like selling real estate property. I mean, I know that I need to buy houses for 100 houses in San Luis Obispo. Okay, I have a broker's license. I'm not gonna go look for that myself. I'm gonna hire a broker and I'm gonna have to pay him to do that for me. And that would be
Right.
reflected in the sales
Yeah,
price.
and so, my hunch is, my intuition is that the cost of paying a broker will be so high relative to the cost of a transfer via these other mechanisms that very few people would use that.
Darn, I had a plan all set up. You guys didn't.
Don't you think there are gonna be people that I'm not even talking about going and finding it individually, there are going to be people who say, use the dashboard to help me find this water from 5 different people. Or whatever, I need this much water, I don't want to deal with the dashboard, I don't have anybody in my office to do that. I'm gonna pay you, John Brown, to go set that up for me and get it through.
I'm not sure you'll be able to do that through the dashboard.
No, you wouldn't be able to do it through the dashboard because the only way into the dashboard is with an account and
Right.
ownership of land.
Okay,
And however, where I think your model works is where there's a, somebody that manages a ranch and it's really, they don't have enough people to time, really. Many of my board members are kind of in that situation. Like Scott, he may not have the time to go out and go find a water supply. So he's gonna have to find a broker to go out there and beat the bushes.
Yeah,
around
and
there.
again, I think you're gonna learn that with these planned auctions, it's so straightforward and simple.
They go
and-
into that.
And costless in the sense, the transaction costs are so low that going through that labor intensive and financially expensive process won't
Be there.
I agree with you that that should happen over time unless something bad happens.
Yeah.
Because, growers love to talk. And if somebody has a bad experience, you won't hear about the 200 good experiences. You hear about the one bad one, right? And, at least none of us know how this thing is kind of going to work at the beginning. So if there is another vehicle for somebody to use your sales example again, land around here gets sold one of two ways. A guy decides to sell his land and he either lists it or he goes and talks to his neighbor, right? And those are kind of the two ways. In this case, the listing is participating in the auction process, and the other one is, it's like when, hey, I lost my well, and your neighbor says, hey, I gotta finish my corn in 3 days. You can have the pump for a couple days, and so those things will still happen. But you need to be able to have that run through this, whatever, whether it's third party or this portal, to where you can do that. To me, the big thing is you need to flag that information because it's not an arm's length transaction. Right. And so, people will report whatever they want price wise on that stuff. But the only real price information is from those contracts.
One thing I think that this committee was cautious of, though, is the model where the broker purchases the water and then flips it.
And
That's
extracts-
something you
and
guys are
extracts all
not.
the gain.
Confirmation then that's not. Broker can match the buyer and the seller, but cannot be.
Something everybody can agree on.
imagine that.
Heard,
From owner to owner, not
Yeah.
anyone in between.
and we heard about the suspicion around brokers in Australia. Presentation.
Right.
So this one here, I think we put this one to bed. So how do we handle user accounts that span multiple trading zones? Part of that, we'll come back to it, but the idea is to explore ways.
I would just reference on the ones below the MT that aren't really and I guess even it would apply to a DAC. So if you're in that area, or like my district, for example, there's many of us gonna be at MTs anyway. We can't pump the water, so we might as well not hinder the movement of water going out.
Yeah, okay.
That was that directional.
So directional,
Yeah.
directional. Okay, great. I like it. Great.
Because we can't pump it anyway. We'll be forced to sell. So we don't wanna, just because we're at MTs, we don't, we're locked out from moving water
So,
out.
so the only caution, so I agree, that's very similar to how we operate, but the one cautionary word is that you could effectively have someone who's pumped their native, pumped all of their transitional, and you're gonna let them pump more by buying it from one of these other, and I guess we're
On
doing.
the
that
east, it won't matter because we got the hard cap, so they'll only buy so much. Yeah.
And so we put up 2 meetings ago, we put up a map where you might remember originally we had groundwater contours, show the groundwater level, and then we intersected that with the minimum thresholds and we did distance from minimum threshold. And obviously there were lots of areas that were below minimum threshold, but we deliberately chose a more distant time period because we didn't want anyone to be uncomfortable with it. We didn't want it to be timely current data because it was just for the purpose of discussion. What is the sense? If I go back to this map, are 75% of these going to be below? What is the sense?
Everyone in the east, almost except for a handful, are at MTs pretty much. But that's why we did the allocation's only 1.15. The hard cap of 2.5 needs to be made up by transfers.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Great. Okay.
And then if you don't transfer it, the penalties are more severe.
As you go to 25U, 24U and west, I wouldn't say we're at minimum thresholds, but we all know minimum thresholds are coming up. That's a different discussion, but just plan on them coming up. And then
You mean the footage elevation?
because on the we didn't redo the subsidence calcs, and when you do redo the subsidence calcs, those come up. Because that was the oddity that
A lot less water left.
controlling before groundwater levels.
Yeah.
Because the ground is sinking faster than and that's due to deep pumping. We're seeing more deep pumping, which interestingly leaves the upper aquifer safe to a certain extent, but subjects you to it. Trust me, in my mind, I stay up at night just wondering how is this all gonna work. But
And the thing is a lot of the, I guess maybe if you're a city of Corker or something like that, maybe it's a big concern, but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
yeah, if you're going like this, it really is. But
I mean, the reality, what kind of infrastructure? It's not the Frankfurt Canal.
well, so interestingly enough, what it is, and you talk to our growers, and it's happening out there. It's
Well,
like it's
well
the well
collapsed.
collapse. Yeah.
And that's just kind of like, fact of life, it's like a cost of doing business. I mean, well, collapses, well, I guess next time put more expansion joints in it. I mean, or.
Well, and
The problem is the pressured zones pull water from the east.
yeah, and then not only that, what we're contending with is once you depressurize that lower
Well, it doesn't
aquifer,
come back.
yeah, and you're in trouble. And right now, the way we're looking at the groundwater levels, instead of it aiming where we're going to level off, we're headed for the bottom. And so, where was I going with this?
Well, the question was, the question is how many are?
I said. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at is that, yeah.
Well, so that maybe the engineering team's work is going to be very simple because it's going to be a bunch of management areas,
Correct.
which is fine.
But that's what's happening is the purplish gray on the east is at its minimum threshold.
Yeah.
And then everything as you move to the west is too steep.
Yeah.
Right now.
Okay.
So the market, I felt comfortable. I was happy. What you guys are setting up is a market to move and play with the 10 inches and give everybody a little bit of flexibility. As we start growing, the pressures will become more and more, and then you're going to start seeing levels kind of go all over the place, and that's where we'll be in trouble. But for now, the 10 inch, I think you're just going to see things kind of.
So one other question, and I don't want to cause controversy, but what if 24 and 25? Those are not hydrologic boundaries, right? Those are roads.
Streets.
Yeah. So what if 24 and 25 are together in a pumping trough?
They are.
Okay, so the way the trigger currently works is that 24 has to manage its cap within 24, 25 has to manage its cap within 25. What we're trying to avoid is transferring additional pumping into the pumping trough.
Correct. Well, our pumping trough is on a diagonal, but yeah,
It is, okay.
yeah.
Okay. So we're saying 24 and 25 are carved out separately. 24s will only be able to transfer with 24s unless they're transferring.
Yeah, that's a
Upgraded.
long distance.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know, Scott, you're in that. You're in that. I mean, do you see transfers going from 24, top of 24U to 25U?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably what, 8, 10 miles? Like more than that.
It's 10 miles. Our district is 10 miles east, west, north, south about.
That's 5
So that's 5 or 6 miles.
That's why we put the 5 mile radius.
Okay, cool. All right, so the engineering work may be straightforward. The logical grouping is going to be all those that are above threshold.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, okay. There is a complication.
Always.
Yep.
There always is.
I'm not even gonna bring it up, but just keep going.
All right. Talked about that. All right, and so then other next steps, this is not really something to discuss so much, but something we need to do. One thing we committed doing before the next meeting is we're going to put together a matrix of these GSA allocation policies so we can look, kind of like we had that water market measles chart. We need to have a GSA allocation measles chart so we can sort of see how do these three things work, and where are they the same, where are they the different, because there is information there that affects how a water market will work. And then and a list of what transfers are already permitted. What are those mechanisms? How do you do it? Because you want to reconcile these things so that there aren't different rules for different types of transfers and that all of it works together seamlessly. And then is the vision with market transfers, can someone carry over? It sounds like the answer is yes. Craig said this earlier today. So if you buy allocation and don't pump it, it can carry, it's part of the carryover provision.
Is there a time limit on that?
Whatever the time limit is within the
So-
allocation
so
system.
For the current year, we were in, well, last year's, I guess now. So the native, the 0.3 and the 0.5 could all be carried over. You didn't use it. They all have a 5-year first in, first out limit. So first day of the 6th year, they're gone. If you transfer any of the tier 1 or tier 2, it has to be used in that water year. So if I were to move someone right now, October 4th, they got to use it by next September 30th. But if you don't transfer it, you can carry it over for the 5 years. But as soon as you do transfer it, it's got to get used in that year.
So for how many years?
But the market won't allow that same transfer because it has to be the native yield.
Correct. And then in the current year with the rules just adopted, it's still, there's only native and tier 1 for the next year. Same rules still apply. You can transfer either of them. If the penalty water gets transferred, it's got to be used, not so much for the native. It can, once it goes over there, it can carry.
On the form, there's a box. I am 100 acre feet and this is tier 1.
I haven't even seen the form, but yeah, it's got the flavor and it's got the, so we're gonna have to track every year because of the 5-year rolling. You're gonna have to have flavor and year.
Age, vintage, yeah.
Well, and when we came up.
Vintage and region. Variety.
Year in year 4, you get to sell that tier 1, tier 2
Correct.
again, and that's not gonna work.
Yeah, but it's been allocated, so that's already taken out of the
But I
mix,
mean,
which
if
is
you,
why
in
the,
year 3, buy water, and you're gonna carry it for the next 5 years, but year 4 of your 5 years, you
well,
sell.
yeah, you could buy the native and carry it potentially, but the native you're buying has the year attached to it.
And
So
it
if
can't
someone's
go past
selling
that
you a
5
5-year
years.
over native, you better use it that year.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. All right. And so just realize for the legal
thing
team,
to track.
you will need changes to ordinances and stuff to allow these market
Correct.
transfers to be part of
And
that.
that's why they're on rules and regulations. We're on emergency ordinance, transitioning into rules and regulations. So those concepts were left. Remember, we talked about those. There was no need to set those right now because we didn't know where everybody else was going. So now that we know where everybody else is going, now that we have a better legal read, because at that time, we didn't even remember when we were talking about the mid-kaweah, we didn't even know the legalese of timing. And now there is some new understanding on like CVP limits and other things. So all of it makes sense to me. That was where we started with, which is 5-year limits, first in, first out. Rules are pretty common.
I don't think the surface water credits have any limitation, but they're gonna be limited as to where they can go anyway by the individual district.
I missed Eric's comment earlier about Fox Canyon and references there. You want to maybe, if you talk a little bit about why you use Fox Canyon as some of the lessons learned and.
Yeah, just because we're 5 years into the implementation, right? So we've learned a lot of painful lessons. And we, this process in some ways mirrors what, when we applied to be this consultant, we proposed a Fox Canyon-like process, right? Not in any way a Fox Canyon solution, right?
Yeah, for instance, I think one of the telltale ones is we're using evapotranspiration
Right.
to the parcel, and Fox Canyon is using
Well,
to the
yeah, metering, yeah. Yeah, and the other one too is so there is adjudication has been initiated in all 3 basins. So we're 3 basins. So not just 3 GSA, 1 GSA, 3 basins. And adjudication has been initiated in 3. One of those is went to trial this month. They've been at it for about 3 years. The other 2 basins have simply filed the legal complaint. It's nowhere near going to trial. And in none of those are they challenging the water market. They're really challenging the allocation system, right? So how much water does everyone have at the start?
It was the one thing they aren't challenging.
Right. Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Eric?
Yeah, no, I just appreciate you addressing my comment. Thank you very much.
All right. So
I have one.
Please,
question
please.
before we
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah.
So there was an indication, earlier, we were just talking about native water in terms of the transfers and so on. Media uses this as a vehicle to do that. But what if, I'm not speaking for the board, I'm only one individual. What if our board decided, no, we want to go ahead and use this to allow for those people to make those other exchanges as well for their tier 2 and 3? Or not tier 2, tier 1 and 2s. Is there anything that precludes us from doing that within our own GSA?
The committee is going to make a recommendation for a strategy. It will be made available. And again, the strategy document that we write will lay out why we made that recommendation. It's the one currency that everyone has, right? It's the only bucket that everyone has. And it also helps address some of the concerns about mitigating adverse impacts, right? You're limiting how much each individual transfer.
Right. The only reason I'm bringing that back up is I'm going to back up to where I mentioned before about the possibility of GSA using this as a vehicle, as opposed to having growers submit their land for retirement, if you will, or on an annual basis, in order to spend some of those funds that we're going to acquire to be able to minimize the amount of pumping and allow others to be able to have a little more, to move in the right direction, if you will. And this might be a means by which we could do that. In other words, people submit their ground, they make offers and so on to, okay, I'll retire this ground, this water, I take this much for it. And the GSA could look at it and say, okay, we'll spend up to X number of dollars an acre foot to basically to reimburse those people for the purpose of retiring their ground.
And so, for example, if we're proposing a series of monthly auctions, a GSA could say agricultural landowners can be
beginning of the season.
Yeah, but agricultural landowners can be market participants, and the GSA can be a market participant. We could retire water.
Well, theoretically, Kaweah Delta could do it as a landowner.
Or Joe, next year you could have one, and if you 4 months in advance of the growing season too, and
Right.
the GSA wanted to do that, they could go in and offer a price, and then people can plan on that.
Decide whether or not they want to participate.
Yeah. That's the advantage of this, but it's still up to every GSA to, these are recommendations only.
Right. Well, the converse of it is having farmers offers and so on, is that not every farmer is in the same situation. So what you're trying to do is get the most water for the least amount of money. Basically retire the most ground for the least amount of money. And so what may be, fair for me, talk about one particular area and say, well, yeah, this is all I can afford, or this is all I can really expect for income from this property. I'm, as opposed to somebody who's over there who's got some permanent crops and so on, or maybe thinking about going to permanent crops or whatever. And they say, well, I have to have more money, or I've got more debt. I can't afford to set it out, retire it. And so it would allow that graduated, basically along the lines of that reverse auction again, for those people to submit their offers to retire their ground. You following me? And then we take and buy the most amount of ground in particular management areas for the least amount of money.
Well, I think what Chuck is alluding to is probably where you're going to head, because this market is, what we're talking about is individual landowner transfer. And I think what you're talking about is actually, like he said, is ahead of the season running a reverse auction to buy permanent.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Or just for 1 year,
Annual,
right?
on an annualized basis.
But if your GSA board decides to do that, they would just roll that into what the native allocation necessarily. Unless they're trying to become a broker themselves and buy the ground out and then resell it to people. But if you go the path of where your GSA board would want to spend money to permanently fallow something out, that amount of that amount of native you're saving would just roll into your
Everybody else.
native allocation. You could. For the GSA.
Yes, and allow that to be.
But I don't think it needs to be part of the market. That's just gonna be a.
I have a comment from Johnny Haley on the GSA makes it, the allocation small enough and pumping fees high enough that they drive price down, whitelands.
I don't know, price of the whitelands down, not price down, it's price, yeah.
Johnny, do you want to elaborate on that anymore?
Yeah, I'm just saying if the GSA's goal is to just, get this done for the least cost, they can just ruin everybody, drive the price of the whitelands down, then they can buy all the ground cheap and then they can retire it and then the problem's solved. Just put a bunch of people out of business.
Well, that's the state's goal.
We go back to markets.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about one.
So the last thing we need to chat about today is October 19th. We have a public workshop number 2 scheduled. And so do you want to share, Craig, do you want to share details of time and place?
It's 2 to 3:30 at the at Commissioners Auditorium.
It's over there by the
Ag Center.
Ag Center across the street in
What day was that?
19.
The 19th.
And the objective of this is our reporting out to the general public, the work that the committee's been engaged in. So the 2 obvious things to present would be, the 2 obvious things, there may be others, would be that we have not yet reported to the public the guiding principles that this group adopted. And then
The existing markets.
And then I think we did, I'll have to look back. I thought we did do existing markets, but but then the second thing would be, these initial decisions, high-level decisions about what this thing looks like, the structure of the market and the protections against adverse impacts. And I would propose just not getting into the minutia, just doing the high, basically what was decided last month, that real high-level stuff. So are there other things? So first of all, do you have objections to any of that? And then are there other things that you would like to see reported out to the public?
People are gonna ask when's it gonna start?
Yeah.
So the driving goal is to have something online by early next calendar year.
Yeah.
Right.
Probably need to bring that up.
Yep.
I'll get out.
Yeah. And so actually this, what I would propose is this program period, unit water eligibility. Some of that's too abstract, but program period, who's eligible to participate, type of exchange, price information, mitigation of adverse impacts. That walk them through what that looks like. And then, of course, even before that, discussion of the guiding principles. Why does this look the way that it does? What motivated some of these decisions? Like having these triggers that restricts trade.
I think if you put the word up there, formal in all capitals, you're gonna lose
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
people
Yeah.
right away
yeah,
or anger them.
I agree. Yeah,
If you just took it off and just wrote what you did.
Yeah,
below
type of
that,
exchange,
they'd be
sure.
fine, but when they say- A lot of people assume that means it's the government.
all right, fair enough. Yeah, good point.
Type of exchange, bureaucratic.
Other than developing the market itself, how much time does the software people need to modify the water dashboard if that's completely platform?
Yeah, we better,
That would
we
be,
need to bring Scott into the loop.
I don't think those modifications are that sophisticated.
no, he's gonna be tied up until late November, because that's when the first round of invoices are gonna go out, but in early December, he'll be freed up. He can move pretty fast, so that'd be a conversation with him to bring in.
Probably need to do a scoping session with him to make sure that modifications.
We probably ought to bring it up with him. Well, I guess a decision right now by this group or a head nod is, generally speaking, do you see the water dashboard as the vehicle? Is there anybody objecting to that? Okay, then,
As of now, no, assuming we see how it actually plays out when people see the final product, right? And everything's in there.
so what we'll do is we'll start beginning the discussion. There's a team overseeing the water dashboard. and we'll just bring it up with that group.
I would also talk to them about what you're looking at for the trial year, but where you want to ultimately get to with, I think you were saying, what was it that you could click on by zone or something?
Yeah, I mean,
You
if
have the
they've got all the
different
data, you'd be able to set yourself up into those.
Yeah.
Your one entity would know.
That data exists currently. So the parcels are identified by management area.
It doesn't
We,
in the east, but I don't know if you've tagged them that way.
no, we don't have that map loaded in, but it's the GIS function, right?
Yeah.
I would say that map needs to follow parcel lines, so the curved lines need to become jagged.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is okay, this is what we need to trial it. This is what we're looking, so they don't come up with a solution because
We're not redesigning it every year.
oh, if you'd have told me that, we would have
You've
done
done it
this
differently.
We have to start all
Yep,
over.
yep, okay. Scott's been pretty darn good at getting it right in the ballpark and then refining it from
I
there.
only say that from personal experience.
So one other question about the public workshop, who would you like to do the presenting? Do you want consultants? Do you want someone from the
Chuck?
committee? Chuck?
I can't be here on that day.
Okay, let's go down to the line.
Aaron?
Sophie. Okay.
I'm not sure if I'll be here.
Well, no, I
got
think
some
that,
things in the air. I don't know.
I do think it would be good to have somebody from the committee do it. Or
Yeah, with consultants for sure.
And I think that's what we did last
Okay,
time.
how-
19th,
who's-
that's-
I'm-
what time
I think
is that?
Matthew would do a good job.
What's the time?
2 to 2:30. 2 to 3:30.
Huh?
2 to 3:30.
3:30.
yeah, how about we do that? How about we do this? How about if Matthew and I tag team the presentations with committee members present for Q&A?
That makes
Whoever
sense.
can
Maybe,
be
and
there.
maybe to introduce and kick us off.
Correct, yeah.
They, a committee member can introduce you and me.
Yep, and then we can tag team it.
And we'll also have it on Zoom as well.
Virtual.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do that.
And so if you have any thoughts, if you wake up in the middle of the night, oh, we need to tell the public X. This is only 2 weeks away, so please.
Yeah, I would.
Let us know your thoughts.
My one thought is I will work through our update, definitely have the matrix, because that'll be the first question, right? Is, well, the rules, we've already adopted rules that don't have to match that, so
We ought to
Probably need
start
to
with the
have
matrix.
disclaimer at the bottom or somewhere in the presentation that shows it's what we're recommending for native, but greater and east already have this set of,
We're not, yeah, and to make it clear, we're not restricting what graders.
that's where
already
that'll
done.
avoid probably some questions. Might avoid a couple questions.
Don't get into everyone being upset.
I like
Any other last comments or
Just
questions?
always leave
Can I
there.
ask, I have not been able to because usually Microsoft.
Hi, I have a question.
Andrea, I could never get because it just locked me out of this. So is there another place where all the documents can be stored or get access? I'd like to see this engineering it.
Yeah.
Report when they're available.
We can probably try a different,
Yeah, and I had the same problems with SharePoint. It took me 2 or 3 months, then it worked, and imagine, I don't know why it suddenly worked, but
But see, we had an account and we've used it for a long time, and for some reason, it kept saying it was sending you a code,
Yeah.
but I have no idea.
yeah,
what
it was
that
sending it
code
to
was
someone
doing,
else's
yeah.
cell phone. Yes, that's the exact same thing it happened to me.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
We'll
And
find-
at one point, I got a code and I got all excited and put it in and said it's time limited. We worked on that thing forever, and I can still use SharePoint from my business. I just can't,
Well, actually,
I can't get on.
just so you know, what mine was is I had to be logged in to a very particular Outlook account. And if I'm already logged into my Outlook account, then it will open the SharePoint site. If I'm not, it doesn't matter what code I have, it won't open it unless my laptop is logged in. But here's what's funny is I have 5 Outlook. It took me like 3 months to figure out which Outlook account it was.
I think maybe what we can do is I can set up on our website a portal that you can just go to that link and then it'll send you to all the
Because
files.
it's all
That would be
public
so
information.
good.
Well,
So there is, you have greater visibility than. the public.
Yeah, we know because until things get, we only put out to the public the items that are finished because we're always working on them. So you hate to give out something that then.
But the point is, you
But I'd
should,
like to be able to
You're
look
right.
at some of these slide decks
Yeah,
and
me
stuff to
too.
prepare for.
Okay.
it's
the
important,
meeting a
yeah,
little better.
it's important. We'll work on it for sure.
Just see the maps, being able to go back and go, okay, now here are my notes.
Yep.
You know, that, I'll work with Candriel. Maybe there's a way we can put up a link on our website to the SharePoint, meaning they just need to go to that link and then go to the SharePoint.
To that particular SharePoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, the problem is if your computer. is
Yeah,
logged
it's
in,
not logged
It
in.
recognizes that. and
Yeah, yeah.
it tells you.
How about we just-
Because otherwise anyone could go there. Otherwise. Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll work on it.
It's not, you know, a lot of the,
I
you know,
don't
the
have a
white
problem because I've got
that are just specific to SharePoint. I understand. I can't get that, but
private
some of the presentations.
We may need to send you a old-fashioned way of email.
Yeah, that's extremely
Or,
reasonable.
you know, you can put it in Dropbox or you can put it on
Yeah.
their site, just actually on your site. where
Yeah.
If you give us a way to log in.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something. I
And
mean,
then,
if we have to have some sort of a passcode to get into that particular site or whatever the case is, but that's at least, you know.
Yeah, we know he wouldn't share with any of his family members the way the drink water.
My sisters are good.
And Sonia had a question here about Spanish materials and translation at the meeting.
Yeah.
And something that you and I need to talk about for the,
FSS.
yeah, we've got a pilot interpretation for, it should be launching every. Probably one of these is this.
Okay.
Coming meeting.
So Sonia, we'll work on that and get the information out as soon as possible.
And remind me how we handle that in the first public meeting.
I think what we did is we asked for Spanish and we had dual. We were set up for dual, but nobody came.
What we'll have is focus interpreting will bring 10, usually they have 10 to 15
Headsets.
remote headsets
Oh,
and two translators.
Oh, great.
That's how we do it in my business. We have a little booth in the back. Otherwise.
You have a comment and a question.
Sure.
I wanted to see about the timing of the meeting. 2 to 3:30 p.m. really excludes a lot of residents that are unable to attend a meeting at that time. In our experience, residents are working at that time or getting home from working in the fields or ag jobs. And so I wanted to see if at all possible, if this meeting can be held in the evening when residents, not only DAC residents, but other community residents are available to participate. Ideally, a meeting after 5 is when we maximize participation. So that I wanted to make that recommendation. And then also I have a question about how community outreach will be done by the GSAs. Will there be like door-to-door outreach or flyering or calls? If you can share how outreach will be conducted and then see if the meeting can be held at a later time.
So is that Sonia? I don't know who, I apologize, but one of the things we ran into is because of the building usage that we're using, they don't have availability after hours. But what we plan to do is to record the event and make the recordings available after. And we're always available if anybody has any questions or concerns. You know, they can contact myself, any of my staff, and or through the GSAs. As far as outreach, the GSAs are kind of probably handling it on their own, so I don't know. We would probably be posting that on our website and sending it out via our interested parties list at this point in time. In the future, we can entertain some potential after hours meetings, but right now, because of the building location where we're using, we did check with them and they were unable to make it available after hours. So we'll look at that in the future, but for this meeting, we're set and reserved for the Ag Commissioner's office. So I apologize, but
okay, I definitely want to. Oh, go ahead.
We will definitely have the presentation, the materials, and the video online shortly thereafter. We usually get it up within a day or two afterwards.
Okay, yeah, I just want to stress that if the audience, is the community, these meetings need to be held at times when community members are available. Otherwise, it's excluding them from participating.
Duly noted.
Maybe the next one, farm equipment.
You mean across the street?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
across the street.
Well, one of the issues is, I'll just be very honest, we're running into is that the cost is getting, we only have certain limited funds, and you're getting into thousands of dollars to just.
Really? Just to use their building?
So I do feel that, we're providing the availability of the video. We're always available.
How many people are coming to these?
So
Only done one.
we had done
And
one.
it was
and-
virtual.
Yeah, because we were still under lockdown.
So
So
you don't know how many people are gonna show up.
I think this group is generally the group that shows up.
Tony, do you have any idea how many people will show up? You did it now or did it later? I mean, at the current time, or
Yeah.
if you did it at 5:30 or 6 in the evening?
We should check. Did she leave? Oh, yeah, Sonia, do you have any idea anticipated in your normal workshop?
Sorry, was that a question for me?
Yeah, sorry. We were just curious on what your anticipated attendance would be if we were to move it.
Well, I know that you would definitely at least maximize more opportunity for residents to get involved. I couldn't say you get XYZ number of residents. I know that Self-Help Enterprises will be doing outreach to residents to invite them to participate. That's why I also asked about what the plan is for GSAs to do outreach and again, if this is a public meeting for residents, like what that plan is to engage them. So I couldn't say. I would defer that question to you all. But I just know that if you do want to get the most participation, these types of meetings need to be held at times when residents are available and not working.
I think we take it under consideration, but with our schedule and the things that we have ahead of us, we continue for the 19th and provide flexibility and video, and then we'll try and find another location. I'll be very honest, in the number of people we've seen at public workshops and stuff, we could probably find a smaller venue at a lower cost, and then go that route. Because the ag complex, it's hard because you're usually renting the big rooms.
Yeah.
You just don't need
And
that.
you don't need it.
Yeah, that's why the ag
You're not
commissioner,
doing a
yeah.
Food thing where they waive it.
Yeah, and as the ag commissioner's office, because it's government to government, we don't have any costs associated with that. So it's a nice, trade-off there.
And trying to find someplace fairly centralized. Because
Yeah.
you could go to the county offices in Visalia,
But I don't know if they would so the issue they have is they can't make facilities available after 5 o'clock unless there's,
even up at the.
that's the reason why we couldn't use the ag commissioner's office, because they're not cleared after 5 o'clock unless it's a county function, I think.
But like you said, we'll do the interested party databases for all the GSAs. And then, I would assume you're going to reach out to your counterparts at Okieville, for example, for some of the small community systems that you want to be there because they're the ones the most impacted or affected.
All our
Whereas,
growth, yep.
the residences within the corporate cities, they're essentially being covered externally from the market right now.
What about library in the city of Terry?
Yeah, that might be another good one. It's just an odd, because it's set up in a dais type, but it is a nice building and we might be able to get that. Yeah, that would be a good one. Yeah, I'll talk to the city of Tulare and see.
You can do it in GID.
We could, but we'd be crammed. Sardines.
It's pretty small.
It's pretty small, and our internet sucks.
But aside from that.
Yeah, but aside from that, we like it.
The mixed nuts are pretty good.
Yeah. Oh, not as good as these.
All right, thank you, Sonia. And thank you, committee.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.